Hello. Back to him. Great days.
Good to go? All right. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
My name is Nathan Everline. I'm the Executive Director for the League. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to everybody who has been a part of this process so far. This is the final policy meeting before we bring things to the annual conference. So I'm going to turn things over to our League President and Chair for today, Michael Wilkes.
Thanks, Nathan. Good morning, everybody. How are you this morning?
Good. Well,
Glad to have everybody here this morning for the policy committee meeting. So I am not Troy Tabor, but I will impersonate him this morning. So, but my name is Michael Wilkes. I'm the city manager in Olathe, Kansas, and also the league president this year. So thanks for being here. I think what we'll do is start off with Greg, who's my vice chair, and go around the room, maybe tell us who you are, where you are from, and what you do there. So that'd be awesome.
I'm Greg Thompson. I'm in the City Commission of Winfield, Kansas, currently serving as mayor, and retired from a financial executive, I would suppose, of plastics companies in Winfield.
Spencer Duncan, Government Affairs Director for the League. You'll hear me talk more than you want by the end of the
I'm Sarah Taylor, and past president of the League, city commissioner with the city of Ottawa.
Mike Taylor, I'm here representing the Kansas County Commissioners Association. Spent 20 years with
Leslie Herring, I'm the city administrator. I keep wanting to say assistant, which is funny because we've never had one. In Kansas, which is, for those of you not familiar with Johnson County, very, very far northeast Johnson County, so we border Kansas City, Missouri, and Lynette County.
Dick Carter, and I am the lobbyist for the city of Overland Park, and also work with Steve Shonley and Manhattan.
Natalie Wright on behalf of the city of Olathe and the city of Wichita. City manager, communications, and education manager of the league.
Mike Nolan, I'm the assistant city manager of Connect.
Leanne Johnson, finance director at City Valley.
Trey Hawkins, city manager, city of Victoria.
Terry Summers, and the mayor of Mount Hope, as president.
Linda Morris, city commissioner in Manhattan.
What's Kessler, mayor of Hayesville.
Carol Moore, mayor of the city of the Highlands.
Ricky Danner, I'm a contract lobbyist.
Kelly Williams, contract lobbyist represent 5 cities in North Johnson County. I'm Nikki Lee, deputy city administrator for Prairie Village. We work with LGR, but I have folks here legislative affairs.
Jill McFarland, attorney for Kansas Municipal Youth Service. Woody Stark, legislative liaison with the League.
Stage premiers with the league.
Alexander Rain and signature for the city of
Nathan Everline.
Brad Cooper, Sunflower Stager.
All right. Thank you guys very much. We're going to start off hearing from Brad a little bit. Let him talk a little bit about his thoughts on the upcoming legislative session. So,
well, hey, I appreciate y'all having me. Many of you guys I know and I've worked with in capacities. One when I was at the Star. I know some of you from those days. And a little bit, just real quick about what I do. I run I left the Star back in 2015, took a job outside of journalism for a while, came back in 2018 and started my own political news service, which has been around since February of 2018 and going on 6 years, and has been flourishing and been able to survive fairly well on my own with the help and support of my lovely wife, who is takes care of the business side of the operation. So a lot of you folks I've worked with, and I know a lot of you from being at the Capitol. Some of you I don't, and I appreciate you having me here to chat with you a little bit. My website focuses mostly on politics of what goes on in and out of the Capitol statewide. I cover a lot of municipal issues. I have a lot of subscribers who are in. Some of you guys here do subscribe, and so you guys know that I do spend a fair amount of time, focused on municipal coverage, and I think it's important. That's something that doesn't get a lot of coverage. So we can start with, it's a little bit early still to get a really good, probably firm grip of what next year's session is looking like. A lot of the interims really haven't met, or the interim committees haven't really met and gotten started yet. I mean, there have been some some conversations about mental health and some of those issues, but we haven't really got into the meat grinder of elections and some of those, and foreign ownership of land and some of those other things that the legislature will be working on between now and December to kind of figure out where they're going to go on some of those issues. So, but yes, it is August, and we probably do have a little bit of a feel for what next year is going to be looking at. And I would say probably some of the freshest news or some of the freshest things I'm hearing, and somebody told me yesterday they've heard this before and they don't really believe it, but there is a lot of talk that this may be an abbreviated session. There's some talk that this session may be over at the end of March or early April, that the speaker and the Senate president don't really want to be around for very long, and they could very well be done or push things to get done, before April 1st. And I don't know, how strong that is, but there is a lot of talk that this may be a fast session. It's an election year, so people are going to want to get out and do electioneering, and so there is some interest. And somebody yesterday I talked to that matters sort of confirmed that there is interest in trying to bring this session to move it along very quickly and do it a lot in short time and be done. Given that, the first priority, I think, left over from last year that will be the big election year will be taxes. Seems like we talk taxes every year, but last year, Governor Laura Kelly, of course, many of you know, vetoed a tax bill that would have moved the state to a flat tax. That's going to come back. Last year, they were on the brink of at least trying to override the governor in the Senate, and 3 Republican senators, namely Rob Olson, Alicia Straub, and Dennis Pyle, pretty much voted against overriding the governor, or basically cast votes to stop the Senate from taking that bill back up again. They've been under a lot of pressure. Americans for Prosperity has been running ads or been sending out postcards on them during the interim, trying to pressure them. I don't know how much good that will do. I don't know if it's clear that Dennis Pyle is running again. He already has 2 opponents in his district that are running against him as Republicans. Mind you, Dennis Pyle's an independent now because he ran for governor as an independent. So I don't think we really know what Dennis is going to do. The last time I talked to him about it, his comment to me was, "I'm running until I'm not running." So I'll let you guys figure out what exactly that means. But he does have 2 Republicans that have filed. One of them is John Epley, a current representative from Atchison. And so the question will be, will those 3 legislators come around and vote for a tax bill? Olson says he's not running again. Pyle, we don't know. And Alicia Straub, I'm not really clear on where she's at on all of that. So they're gonna move on that tax bill, and they're gonna try to hopefully they want to get something passed, hopefully in their minds, maybe as early as January, and get that to the governor. Part of the problem last year is the Republicans kind of left themselves without much room. They ended the session kind of early, and the governor was able to veto bills without the legislature being able to come back for an override. So my guess is this year we will get started much earlier on the tax bill. And I don't know how many of you all are familiar with that, but it was going to set a flat tax at about 5.15%. It was going to move up the exemption on the sales tax on food, and it was going to move the sales tax up. Right now, the exemption on food expires in 25. The governor wanted that immediately. They were going to increase the amount of the property exemption on the school 20 mil tax levy, but all of that died out and didn't go anywhere. So that will come back. Probably one of the issues I think will be of interest to all of you will be property taxes. And last year, the Senate passed a constitutional amendment 28-11 that capped property values from increasing more than 4%. That is now sitting over in the Senate and is alive and well, and will probably be acted on this upcoming session. And if they can't pass that, there will probably be other attempts to try to limit property taxes. The legislature thinks that property taxes are out of control. Probably from your perspective, they blame some of that. I'm not saying that you guys are fault, but they see local governments as the cause of that, and they want to do things to limit that. That's something you should know going forward. I don't think that's a secret to anybody in this room, and some of the lobbyists who have to deal with that are very aware that that's kind of the mindset you're dealing with across the street. So that constitutional amendment will be back, and it has a lot of implications for how properties will be valued going forward. I mean, obviously, just because they pass it, they'll need 2/3 vote to do that, and it will have to pass the poll. So, I mean, you're a long way from seeing whether that becomes reality or not. You will probably see the legislature once again for, I don't know, the 4th or 5th time, probably revisit the government competition bill, which wants to, exempt health clubs from property taxes, to put them, I guess, on what they believe to be a level playing field with some of the, facilities that you guys run. And that bill was packaged last year with a lot of other things, and the governor had no problem vetoing it. It had like tax credits for pregnancy crisis centers in it. It was just loaded up with a lot of things, including a tax break for a property tax break for telecom companies that wanted the extra money that they said that they were going to plow back into high-speed internet expansion. So there were a tax bill that included the telecom tax break, the tax credits for pregnancy crisis centers, the government competition element, and probably about 15 other things that were packaged into that bill. You will see components of that bill come back to life. The legislature's been pushing this whole government competition thing since when I was at the Star in 2014 and 15. My guess is that's not going away. Whether it ultimately passes, I think it's questionable, but you will no doubt see that return. Another thing that probably affects you guys that's worth paying attention to, and it's something I just wrote a story about last week, is, and I know you all deal with this, the legislature sees you guys pass ordinances and tends to react, whether it's selling dogs or whether it's plastic bag regulations or those kind of things. I'm sure a lot of you have taken note of the Lawrence ordinance that just passed earlier in the month that was a response to the Women's Bill of Rights, or SB 180, in terms of providing a safe haven to protect people or residents in their community from any discriminatory fallout from Senate Bill 180. And if you're not really up to speed on 180, it's the bill that defines what a person is or what their gender is at the point when they're born. And that's how it defines it. That bill is now tied up in court because there are two pieces of litigation ongoing. One, the governor has allowed transgender Kansans to change the gender marker on their driver's license and birth certificates. There is legislation in federal court challenging the birth marker changes. And there's legislation in state court challenging the governor's ability to allow gender marker changes on driver's licenses. And neither one of those have been settled. The birth certificate one probably won't be settled for a long time. The birth certificate issue is tied up in federal court because after Laura Kelly became governor in 2019, there was a suit pending against the state because under Sam Brownback's administration, they didn't allow those gender marker changes. And there was a lawsuit that argued that that was discriminatory. Well, the governor settled that lawsuit, or Governor Kelly settled that lawsuit in such a way that they agreed will allow the gender marker changes. Well, Chris Kobach, the Attorney General, went to court that's challenging that out-of-court agreement that Governor Kelly reached to allow gender marker changes. And so that case is in federal court, and there hasn't been any action on that in about a month, but that's something to keep an eye on. But I think the larger point I was trying to make was with regard to the Lawrence ordinance. And there's already Republican legislators that are not happy with the Lawrence ordinance. And like I said, many of you have dealt with that on other related matters where the legislature has responded. Now, how they're going to respond, I think Ty Masterson's comment to me was he was going to hold cities accountable, and whether that was, I think in his words, whether that was the Women's Bill of Rights, whether that was KCK safe and welcoming ordinance, or whether it was any of those, that they were not going to allow local governments to pass ordinances that potentially overrode what was passed by the legislature. Like I said, what that looks like exactly, I don't know. But there's clearly some consternation across the street about the passage of that ordinance. And it would be worth as something, I know you guys want to watch that because that will have bearings on other things that the legislature doesn't like that sees it's occurring at the local level. So it's certainly worth watching. In that vein, we will probably see more bills that will go toward banning gender affirming care. Those bills have been passed in a number of states. Those are all playing out in courts in various states, but my guess is they passed that last year here in Kansas and Governor Kelly vetoed it. They were not able to override the veto. The question would be whether that's going to change much next year. I would be hesitant to think that the votes would be there any more next year than they were last year, but that's just something to kind of keep an eye on. Another issue I think that you guys know is something that Spencer had dealt with is we will probably revisit the whole property registration issue. A lot of cities, I don't know how many in here do that, but you guys some cities have registrations of vacant or abandoned property to kind of keep an eye on that property and make sure it doesn't bring blight to various neighborhoods. And some cities, I don't know how it's structured, obviously different from city to city, but some cities charge, beyond that to administer the registration or to administer the registry. There was an attempt to ban that or certainly limit those kind of abandoned property registries this past session, but it died in the Senate, was sent back to committee. It's still out there. It could come back to life, but for some kind of weird political reasons that are hard to explain here, but it got sent back to committee and didn't happen. But, I'm here to talk to you guys about issues that matter to you, but that's an issue that may very well come back and that you could see again. On some other sort of another issue that may have some effect on you would be, I would expect the legislature to take up bills dealing with transmission line siting. This was an issue down in southeast Kansas because of a Nextera line that Nextera wanted to build from Kansas into Missouri. And a lot of the neighbors in southeast Kansas didn't like it. They thought it, infringed on their property rights. And there was a bill at the end of last session that was going to ban utility companies from using eminent domain to build those transmission lines. In this case, they wanted the local residents wanted to give local governments more power to have oversight on those lines, because I think the residents felt like they had a better chance to lobby against a transmission line with their local government than they did at the legislature. And so the Kansas Corporation Commission has already opened up an investigation into transmission line siting, and whatever that investigation produces and whatever conclusions they come out of that comes out of that KCC investigation could take the form of legislation that you would see next year. Now, whether it would be the same type of bill, this was a bill last year that was pushed by Tim Schallenberger from southeast Kansas, who had a lot of residents who were upset about that. And so it's something, again, from your all's perspective, that's worth keeping an eye on. Schools, we can talk briefly on schools. My guess is last year, the big controversy over school finance was how to calculate school enrollment. And Governor Kelly vetoed a provision. The way that school enrollment had always been calculated had been using you would go back 2 years and use whichever enrollment was higher. The legislature tried to change that to use either the current enrollment or the year just before that. And the goal of that was from the people that advocated that, they argued that you should base the formula on students who are actually in seats, and that schools that were seeing increasing enrollment were better off using the current year enrollment numbers rather than using the 2 previous years. However, using the 2 previous years affects schools, districts, or counties that are not seeing population growth, and they want the earlier total. And so my guess is you will see the legislature revisit that and trying to get the current number of enrollment to use that as the basis for establishing enrollment. And so that will probably come back again. It's kind of it's a complicated thing, but it has a lot to do with how much money schools will get and what that, and how you calculate that. So that is something worth watching next year. Elections is always something that people like to talk about. There have been attempts to ban ballot boxes and limit mail ballots, to limit the mail ballots that come in. Or they want to get, obviously, there have been attempts to get rid of the 3-day grace period after the election for mail ballots. Both of those passed. Getting rid of the ballot drop boxes didn't even get heard in the House because the votes weren't there. I don't know the votes are going to be there next year either. And Governor Kelly would likely veto that anyway. She's probably not going to veto. She's probably not going to sign anything that limits the right to vote. The issue on the 3-day grace period, she vetoed that. They didn't have the votes to override her on that. So my guess is that's not going away, but my guess is you can see attempts to do that again. I mean, they've been trying to do that for a couple of years and they keep coming up short. Plastic bags, another issue you all probably care about. There have been efforts. I mean, this has been going on for like 10 years. I'm sure a lot of you have been in government, city government, get that. By my count, at best, there's 72 votes in the House to do that. That's not enough to override the governor's veto, and she's overridden that. So my guess is they may try that again, but I don't think there's a votes to limit how cities choose to regulate that. And Lawrence, of course, just passed an ordinance to do that. But I'm not sure the votes are there. So, I mean, that kind of sums up, I think I tried to hit on issues that matter to you guys. And if you have any questions, hopefully if there's anything I like fumbled or was not clear about, feel free to ask.
Questions for Brett?
I'm curious about the, what's the name of it, where the big box stores claim back property taxes.
Oh, that's a good
Now,
question.
local governments don't get any choice, they have to get, it goes through VOTA. So whatever that's called these days,
You know,
I've tuned out for a couple of years.
There is never, at least not that I have seen in the legislature to try to define that in a way that you might be concerned about. That's not to say there has been legislation that I think has been introduced that was intended to address city concerns, but that was like a couple of years ago, but it didn't go anywhere.
We call it the dark store.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been.
On the Riley County, the appraiser has given us a spreadsheet of all of the properties, and some of them are in Palo County, some in Riley, but they're all the big box, Walmart, Menards, Target, all of them. And it's even spreading to our local apartment complexes. And I would expect it next to spread to some residential properties. So, to challenge the basis of those taxes and how much further is it going to go before there's a check on this weird interpretation.
But right now, I believe the Supreme Court ruled in the city's favor when it ruled. So I'm not. Yeah, when it finally ruled and upheld I don't know if upheld's the right word. I have to go back and remember it. But it ruled basically in the city's favor, ruled in a way that you would have viewed favorably, in a way that wouldn't have, gutted your tax base. And I don't think there's been any movement on that at all. And I understand why you're concerned.
Well, was the interpreter of that, it seemed to me.
Well, I think the Supreme Court said this is how it's going to be interpreted because they were using a Court of Appeals case decision from like 2012 or 2011 that the court thought was out of line. And it's been a while since I've written about it, and I have.
No, thank you, because I'm behind.
But I have not seen any movement on that. And I think after the Supreme Court ruled on that, like I said, it was a ruling that I believe that cities found favorable, that worked in your all's favor. But I haven't seen any movement. I haven't even heard any talk about it since that case came down. It was all the rave back about a year ago.
Right.
And after that case came down, there's not even been a peep about it. That's not to say it won't come up in some form, but I have not heard much chatter about that.
Brad, maybe just for my own entertainment value, because I know both members of the warring factions dysfunction with the Republican Party at the party level, and I mean, between the former chair and the current chair, does that spill over into anything?
Not yet. That's not to say it won't. I get more emails every day on that subject than anything I write about. And I don't know how many of you, the question sort of goes to this fight between Mike Brown, the current Republican Party chairman, and the former Republican Party chairman, Mike Kuckelman, who are kind of going back and forth. And my suspicion is that Mike Kuckelman is probably more vocal because he probably represents a lot of the faction of the Republican Party that doesn't want to be out there on social media trashing the current chairman. So I think Mike probably represents an unspoken, or not Mike, but Mike Kuckelman represents more of an unspoken faction in the Republican Party. But I don't know where that ends up. There's new Facebook posts every day that are going out, emails every day about accusing him or the current chairman of using money to go to the Republican debate in Wisconsin. And I don't know if any of that's true. I do know what I will say about all of that is Mike Brown did promise to raise $3 million this year for the Republican Party in Kansas. And I mean, I have that absolutely documented. He did that. They're not close to raising $3 million. And they filed their federal report a couple months ago, and they had about $1,600 in hand in their federal report. That's not their state report. They filed two different reports because they get money from different places. So you have to account for it differently. But he promised $3 million, 30,000, I think what was raised in the first half of the year on the federal report. You guys can figure out the difference between 3 million and 36,000. So I don't know. I mean, that will have a lot to do with it, but the Republicans, when it comes to elections, the Republicans rely on a lot of outside groups. So I don't know that it really matters how much the party has. They rely on AFP, they rely on the chamber, people with deeper pockets, and that's where those campaigns will be funded largely by outside conservative groups. They won't be funded by the Republican Party. In fact, at some point, it's like wonder, it won't matter what the Republican Party has or doesn't have in its coffers.
My extension of that question though would be, do we think that their battle over their committee issue is going to have any impact in this building during the session in terms of the representation on the committee? I mean, that I think is more of an issue to some of those folks right now.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, Mike Brown's come down here and lobbied and testified on some things. They had an election, a cleanup election bill last session to make some nominal fixes.
I'm
And
talking about their representation, the African American group and the women's group and the Hispanics groups being booted from the.
well, that would depend on how Democrats use that next year. I honestly.
No, I don't know if those committees are those groups are gonna be over here, because they haven't had a session since that happened. So.
They haven't even acted on that. The Republicans haven't even acted on that proposal, which kind of tells you how maybe toxic it is. I mean, it was put out there and it's like nobody's talked about it ever since it was put out for public consumption. And so I honestly don't have a good feel for that.
My other question, are there any interims that there's lots of interims. Are there any that you think anything's gonna come out of
I
it?
think the energy committee is kind of a big deal. I think what they're gonna talk about an energy plan for the state. They're gonna talk about this transmission siting. Energy is gonna be a big deal, especially in the context of the Evergy rate case, which is now out there. And in fact, there's supposed to be some significant filings on that case today, but I think energy is kind of a big deal. I think it's a boring issue that people don't really pay attention to, but it affects everybody in this room and it affects your budgets and affects how much, you guys have to lay out and you don't have any control of that. And I guess you can hold down your energy costs to an extent, but you still have to be open so many days a week and, and so your costs are going to be going. I know like a lot of the major school districts in this state have intervened in that Evergy rate case. Blue Valley, Sedgwick County, they've all intervened in that, and they're talking millions of dollars if that goes up. So the energy committee, I would watch. I just think that's where a lot of things play out. A lot of people don't pay attention to it, but it affects everybody in this room. I've always believed the utilities committee is, I mean, they don't deal with this, the headline grabbing social issues that we've talked about, but it's the committee that means money, I think, to a lot of people. So, I mean, I would watch that. There will be some serious conversation about changing ethics laws. And that's been controversial, and it's got a very long history to it, but there will be serious discussions about how things are reported and how campaign contributions are reported. So there will be a serious conversation about that in the interim that will come up. There will be a conversation about election law, but based on, it's going to be a lot of the people that are going to testify before that have also had lawsuits thrown out without having merit. So I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about that committee, but it's not one I will spend a lot of time on because it's stuff that they don't have 2/3 to pass any of the two major things that I've told you that we've talked about. And beyond that, I don't know where that ends up other than a couple days of conversation.
Also related to elections and Mike Brown. Any thoughts on making city elections partisan? Where that's.
There have been talk, and he's talked about that, and I have not, that is not set to come up, honestly, that is not set to be discussed as part of the election committee interims. And like I said, given the lineup of what I've seen or heard of who's going to be testifying before, I don't know what that interim election committee is going to look like at the end of the day. There's just going to be a lot of talk about election fraud, and I don't know that I know Mike Brown has talked about that, and I don't, that's just not something I've paid that close of attention to. And I didn't even look at that before I came up. It's a good question, and one that has relevance to you guys, I get. I'm just, that one I'm not so sure about, but he has been an advocate of that, but I don't know how much probably he would have to pass that. Not in the legislature.
So editorializing a bit on Evergy, what we were told, when we were told about the Evergy rates increasing was that, well, it's okay though, because it will be offset by your higher franchise fees. So just so you know, like that's kind of their line or messaging that I have heard at least, that we'll get higher franchise fees even though the rates are going up. So but that was.
Somebody's gonna pay.
Right, exactly, right.
I mean, and what's,
Get us to, not be so bristly about it, but it was also kind of like, all right, come on.
I mean, it's part of it, and it's worth noting, and it probably affects Michael's area maybe more than others, is that Evergy has also asked for a rate increase. It was a story that I wrote, but Evergy has also asked for a rate increase to feed the Panasonic plant. It was a story that I wrote before other people did. And that's a very real thing. And I think what was most notable in Evergy's filings wasn't so much, I mean, Panasonic in and of itself was kind of a big deal because it has cachet. But the thing that Evergy wrote in its filings was that they had some concerns that all the new development that was coming in, whether they had the capacity to feed that development. And there's some concerns about David Tolan and Laura Kelly have been all about economic development. And that's to their credit. Nobody would certainly argue against that. But the question I think that Evergy raised is, and then you also have people moving in with that new development too. And so they're going to have to supply that, which is going to require new facilities to supply all of that. So we're not just talking about, yes, we're talking about this one rate increase as it relates to the one that's on the table, but I think they have left open the possibility that there's more coming after this.
So, I attended not a lecture, but an event where Mike Brunhart, the city administrator of DeSoto, spoke, and he spoke to the news about Panasonic requiring so much more energy. To be honest with you, I don't follow these things. That is not an issue where I am right now. But he did say with all the solar coming on that they'll actually be contributing to the system. I have no idea. I'm just sharing with you. That's that other thing. My actual question, though, is about I don't know. I feel like I, for one, have been blindsided the last several legislative sessions, probably because I'm new by whatever gets thought up to be introduced, right? And it's always chasing whatever ball. So are we, and to what extent are we looking at like what's coming out of ALEC or what's coming out of like other state legislatures? That we can kind of peer around the corner a little bit to see what we think is could be introduced, because we've seen that, you know, whatever states it is that we seem to be following, or at least possibly the, you know, the Republican, you know, angle who doesn't love local government, are looking at to introduce to either upset home rule or, you know, intervene where they feel like cities are going wayward from their social policies. Is that something that we're watching, and what does that look like?
Yeah, mine have, I guess the way I look at it, and I look at it sort of like you do, but maybe more holistically, because I just have more issues I have to deal with. My way of getting a sense to answer the questions you're asking is you look at what happened the session before, what passed, what didn't. That, because that gives you a flavor for what what the legislature's interested in. That's honestly the best way, is what bills didn't make it, which ones, because in a 2-year session, just because it didn't pass last year means that it's still alive for this year. So it's important to know what they did this last session. And I think that's why Nathan and these guys had me in a little bit, because I'm giving you a little bit of a feel for that. Watching the interim committees that Spencer just asked about, those sort of sometimes set the framework for what they're going to talk about. Like whatever this election committee, for instance, is going to produce, and I honestly really don't know. That's worth knowing what they recommend and what their report says, because that kind of gives you a feel for where leadership and where legislators think they need to go. Now, that's not always the case, and it's not foolproof, but it's a good way. And like I said, knowing what they did and didn't do last year and the year before, I mean, the past is the precursor for what's going to happen, I think, with this legislature. At least it's always been my way of gauging it. And so, yeah, I mean, you can look at the Alex stuff, but they produce a lot, and I don't know that that's necessarily reliable. I mean, I don't look at it when judging what they're going to do. I judge on what's happened and talking to people, and I mean, mostly just, interacting with people over at the Capitol, and that's really where I get. I mean, sometimes you'll see something new, but you'll start to get a better idea of that, like in December. That's why I mentioned it's a little bit kind of hard to get a feel for that. I mean, I think I'm giving you guys a fairly good lay of the land of where I think things will go, and I think I feel pretty good about that. But in terms of what the outside groups produce, I don't know that that's a good bellwether. I mean, it could be. I mean, it's worth if you want to be informed, it's worth watching. I mean, the more information you get is always good. It's just not necessarily the way I figure out what's going on. I mean, flat taxes have been in the news with or without Alec for a couple of years now. And so and I don't know that that's just necessarily an Alec thing. That's a lot of states. I mean, 7 or 8 states have been passing flat taxes.
Yeah, it just seems like maybe we have like a couple model legislators in the.
And that's not, I am not saying that doesn't come up. It's just not the tool I use in terms of, talking about what I think is going to happen over there. And like I said, knowing what they did last year in interim committees, I think, at least my field, then your lobbyists or whoever I have over there, that's honestly the best way I figure out what's going on. And I don't necessarily have the complete list.
Well, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. And I appreciate that you really work well with the league on some municipality issues. It's really actually important that everyone knows kind of what's going on across the entire state. So thank you for reporting on that. When you talk about history, I think it is important to bring up the fact that last year the legislature tried to erode the food sales tax for all cities.
Oh, yeah. I just don't think there was any support for that. I mean, it was like killed in the House and.
In the House, but in the Senate, it seemed to have a little bit of traction. So
yeah, but I mean, it just didn't even get out of committee if I recall. I mean, I just didn't think that's something, and that was just all like, yeah, I just don't know that
It passed the Senate.
Yeah, it did.
It's just, but it died in a House
The House
committee.
didn't even, well, it died in caucus in the House. It didn't even get a caucus.
Yeah, I'd be surprised at that. There was just too many, I mean, honestly, you guys lobbied that effectively, so I mean, I think everybody thought that was gonna cause too much harm. And you testified on it, so. I mean, yeah, it's something you should watch out for. I mean, that's not to say it won't come back, but the government competition bill, I think, is a bigger possibility than that. Because the government competition bill's been around now for 5, 6, first it started out, remember, as YMCA's, and then it's evolved.
Well, I think that if we would have sat where we sat here last year, if we would have had a list of 100 things, I don't think we were gonna come up with food sales
Right.
tax.
I would not have, that's what I'm saying, I think things can't come up, but that wasn't a model bill, that sort of came up. Sort of I don't know if makeshift might be the better word for it, I don't know, I mean, you wouldn't have got that out of, reading ALEC or anything else. And I mean, that was an issue unique to Kansas, and it came out of the Senate President's office, and so I think there were some unique aspects of that bill, but. I mean, like I said, my understanding is they want to keep this session quick, and they really want that tax bill more than. I mean, there's $3 billion or $2.5 to $3 billion in the state's kitty right now, and they don't want to go into an election without giving some of that back. And so my guess is that's what they want. I mean, I think that a lot of the abortion stuff, and other than the gender affirming care thing I mentioned, I think that largely is done for now, but yeah, taxes is it, what they want, and they want to do something about property taxes. So I match those two, and I think that's what's going to dominate at least the first month of the session.
If you want to see what will come out of left field, what to watch, I think, is if the Senate, particularly Tax Committee, doesn't think that the House is going to move on the constitutional amendment, there may be an effort to come up with something, and I have no idea what that will be, but there may be an effort to do something to replace, okay, you're not going to give us our constitutional amendment, we can't leave here without doing something. I'm afraid what that something will look like, but if you're looking for the out of left field, that's the one.
But then the problem is you're running into the Laura Kelly backstop.
Oh, I know, I understand. I'm just
That's-
saying that's the.
I
this
mean,
year,
Laura
that's
Kelly's
the
not
tax
gonna sign
reform.
anything that,
Yeah.
I just would be hard pressed to think that, I mean, because there was some tax debate a couple months ago, and I guess my response to the value of the news story, I said, well, you should do a story about this. And I was like, well, until Laura Kelly agrees to a flat tax, or Rob Olson, Alicia Straub, and Dennis Pyle all agree to vote for the tax bill, there's not much of a story there. Because right now the Republicans don't have a 2/3 majority to override the government in the Senate, at least, and they probably don't even have that in the House. So unless Governor Kelly decides she likes a flat tax, and I'm not sure I see that. I mean, Laura, if anything, is very consistent, and I don't see her saying all of a sudden, oh, I've changed my mind on that. I just don't.
So the same thing would apply to the local competition, like the gym.
She would veto that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you sent that to her, she would, I have little doubt that, I mean, she hasn't said specifically that she would veto that. But I don't think she. I don't think
Are there
she's-
any effective arguments to that could come from? the
Yeah,
local-
we talked about that. That's on our agenda.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay out of that, but anyway. But no, I don't, I mean, she said specifically that she would veto it, no, but I think she would. I think-
I'm on a nonprofit board, and this last legislative session, they were successful getting it back. And I heard from a local next door county commissioner yesterday who said, well, they're using government money to lobby in the legislature, and that's being frowned on. Is there any?
Yeah, that's been around since
So long.
I first
Okay.
came to
So
Kansas.
it's,
That's been, that issue has been raised. I think they've tried to ban it or limited it at various points.
well, I think they do, but the nonprofits also do fundraising. So they
Yeah.
have some other money they can use, so I'm just,
That's been an issue like for years. I mean, honestly, long before I was covering this stuff. Is that you used to hear complaints about that. I don't. Not even sure. Yeah, I have not heard much about that lately. I mean, but it's been an issue that's really been around as long as I've almost been in Kansas, which is like 25 years now.
Okay, thanks, Brad.
Thank
Very
you, guys.
much
I
for coming
appreciate
in
it
and
having
talking
me,
to us. We really appreciate it, your insight. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Just give him a hand. Thanks for coming.
Brad,
You're good to see you.
before you go, guys, tell people how to subscribe.
Yes, definitely.
I'm not here to like sell stuff, but
But there was a but, go ahead.
I'm not. I really know. I'm here just to like, I don't try to use this to like be my marketing tool, but these guys know how to, it's called sunflowerstatejournal.com. These guys know how to put you in touch. Mike Nolan subscribes. Some of you guys, I would argue, I think it's the most up-to-date current information you're going to get about what's going at the Capitol. You ask me how you want to know, get it from me.
You're gonna go home.
I didn't want to say that, but
You're gonna go home and your wife's gonna say, did you promote it? And now you can honestly say.
yeah, she'll
yes.
let me come back in now. So anyway, it's like, did you promote it? Like, no, I don't. And I'm not very self-aware, calling attention to myself like that. But I know Olathe subscribes, a number of people in here do and are familiar with it. I think they're generally pretty happy with it. Ask them about their experience, and I think all of them who subscribe would say good things about it, or they wouldn't be. And the people in the room have been here with me for a while too, like right after I started. I know Sarah was in on the first year, and the league's been in for a while, and Mike Nolan's been with me for a while, and so anyway. Not really like trying to play salesman, but anyway. Thanks, guys, for having me. Have a good day.
Thank you.
All right, next, Spencer, you want to talk about our process today?
Sure, some of you have heard this before, those of you who've been in some of the meetings, we have a mix today, people have been at a few of the previous meetings, if you haven't, which is great. So just, we like to always go over our process, remind people what it is. So after the session ends, we start internally reviewing this statement of municipal policy, with some direction from the board or the executive committee, and then staff itself looking back and saying, okay, what can we take out? What should we add? How did the session go? So we do sort of a little review. Then we start to hold these meetings. This is sort of the last of 5. We start with we meet with the other lobbyists first to see what their cities are telling them or what may be on their legislative priorities. We then have these 4 meetings with membership. The first 3 were very specifically focused on certain areas of the SMP. This one today is a much more general, here's the entire thing. Don't worry, I'm not going to read the entire thing to you today, but it's there for discussion, and it's totally open for review. What will happen next is after today's meeting, we then have our conference in October. We will have a discussion similar to this one with the membership and all those who attend our annual conference, which is here in Wichita. And then after that, we will meet again during that conference to take a vote on this SMP to make it a final document, which we can then march forward with as something to use through the legislative process. A few changes this year. One change is we're separating out, at least just physically, the federal issues from the state issues. So we'll now have 2 documents. That not only shortens the one document, but it also gives us a piece to just give to the federal delegation so that folks are interested in that. I think at some point, Nathan and John and I have discussed the idea of there's no real time limit on this necessarily. We'll probably start in the winter through the session is maybe even breaking apart the state SMP into sort of 2 documents and having a review committee take a look at it so that one is a shortened piece that has our legislative priorities and the issues we know are kind of at the forefront. And then make the second piece the addendum with some of this other stuff. And by that, I'm only half joking, but half serious when I say we have in here something like we oppose unfunded mandates. And I always joke, well, who the hell doesn't oppose unfunded mandates, right? But that's still important to have as a policy piece. But maybe that can be in the addendum as opposed to the primary document, right? So there's some pieces like that. Having a big document is fine. It gives us direction, it shows people, but at some point it gets to the size where you're like, that's not always convenient to hand to people. They're never going to read the whole thing, right? So we're looking at ways to make it a little more user-friendly. So you may see some of those changes within the so that's our process. And obviously at any point as we head into the session, I always remind people too, if it's not in the priorities, that doesn't mean we're not paying attention to it or that it's not important. We just haven't made a priority this year. And of course, there will be something that comes up that's not in this document that we're like, oh, that is not addressed from here at all. And sometimes that's when you get emails from us or phone calls from us saying, we need your input right now because we have no idea what position we're supposed to take on this thing. We literally don't know. We need to hear from you as quick as possible. So hopefully it doesn't happen too much, but it probably will happen a few times this year. So that's our process.
All right, you want to start in with the review of the,
Yeah, so let me give you the roadmap here. We're gonna start with the priorities. I will actually go through all the priorities. There's 7 of them, I think. And then we will open it up for discussion on anything you think should be added to those priorities. Take it out of those priorities. You're just fine with those priorities. That will be the open discussion there. There's a few new additions in the rest of the SMP. Not many, but a couple of changes. We'll go through those. And then if there's any questions at that point about those changes or anything else in the SMP, great. And then we'll do the same thing with federal issues. And that'll be the review today of that. Probably makes sense. Just need a screen share. When you go through those other meetings, like, oh my gosh, I've heard this 3 times already. That's all. All right, so this year's legislative priorities through the process to this point. Top of the list is always our fan favorite, and I tell people our mascot, home rule. Consistent with the home rule amendment of the Kansas Constitution approved by voters, we support local elected officials making decisions for their communities, particularly tax and revenue decisions. Government competition, as mentioned, this came up last year. The bill was written by Karen Tyson at the request of Senator Masterson. It did pass the Senate. Actually, it didn't pass the House, and then it ended up bundled with 17 other bills. We did actually, this was the one request we made to the governor in terms of a veto, sent an official letter from the league saying, please veto this bill. And this was our reason why. It is coming back this year, not just because we just sort of know it. After the governor vetoed that bill last year, I got a call personally from Senator Tyson, and she told me, I'm upset, Spencer. I wish you guys hadn't asked for that veto. It's coming back this year. So that's how I know it's coming back this year. It's been promised to me personally. So local governments should retain local control over the services they provide to residences and businesses. Free markets are the best vehicle for allocating goods and services. However, there are circumstances where the free market does not efficiently allocate goods and services, creates externalities that endanger public safety and welfare, or simply does not provide a service. In these instances, it falls to local government to respond to the needs of the people. In addition, local governments provide services for the sole benefit of their residents and should continue to receive tax benefits to provide those services at a low cost. To your question, Linda, earlier, there's several ways we're going to obviously starting to lay some groundwork to attack this. Later this fall, you will all get a survey from us. Please, it will be short and to the point and simple, we hope, but please respond. One of the things we are trying to do as best we can is quantify how much businesses today are receiving in taxpayer-funded benefits, right? Because the argument, especially on this issue, it becomes is us versus them.
Yeah.
Cities are evil and stopping businesses from being able to operate because of all these benefits. And we need to remind this legislature that most of our communities are giving away hundreds of thousands on the small end and millions on the high end in tax benefits, whether it's TIFs, whether it's CID incentives, and some of us are just giving away straight cash. I mean, I just use my own example here in Topeka, where we give away $5 million of cash every year to businesses.
Yeah.
And I never hear businesses complain about that, ever. They seem to, we're awesome when we're giving them things. We're not so awesome. So we are going to try to build some numbers to give to this legislature to show them and quantify that a little bit to say, are we really that evil? Because I said last year, I said, actually, one of the amendments I proposed last year, which did not go over well, but was if they pass a government competition bill, if you qualify for that under the categories they had was restaurants, gyms, couple things, childcare. So if you qualify under that provision, then you should take yourself out of qualifying for any other tax incentive program, right? They don't like that so much. They said you got to pick your poison. So those are some of the approaches we're looking at, but those numbers will be important, and we're doing that survey work now. One addition this year to
How will you release that, or just,
Well, we gotta see who all responds, but it'll be, yeah, no, we'll put something together for the legislature too. Try to get some statewide averages, and highlight some different regions as to what that means to
Well,
different
certainly from the
legislators.
city perspective, we have the ability to let you know. what
Right,
the
and,
things are,
right.
And not wait for the businesses to.
No,
Yeah.
we'll be sending those surveys to the
Yeah.
municipalities to get that data.
Thank you, good idea.
All right, this one's new to our priorities, city elections. We oppose any actions by the state or federal government to impose partisan elections on cities. All cities have the authority to make this decision for their community, and each city, in consultation with its citizens, should make that determination. We believe this is coming back. It came through the Senate next year. Eric Rucker wrote it, went to the Senate floor, only had 17 votes to pass. To Brad's point, Mike Brown has written about it. Whether he has a lot of influence, we will see, but it has been written by the party that they would like to see this come back. As of today, Eric Rucker may have some new aspirations and may be wanting to push this forward again as it relates to running for office, and that's a component of this. And Senator Thompson is in favor of it, and as chair of Fed and State, he would like to see it go through. So we're assuming we're gonna have to deal with this again this year, which is why it's been put into our priorities. So we will see. Biggest thing I've asked groups is we have two arguments that work. One, we can already do this. Your local government today can vote to have partisan elections. So if you want them, go do it. We don't need the legislature to tell us how to do it. But second of all, the Hatch Act prevents federal employees from running in partisan races. What I've asked cities and counties and others is, if you know of current elected officials who, whether they work for the federal government or even better, serve in the military in some capacity, it would really nice to have them reach out to us, because it really got to the point last year where the argument came down to them saying, well, I guess they'll have to make a choice. They can serve this country or they can serve on the school board. That's a BS argument if you ask me, but they didn't have to say that to anybody's face who's actually in the military. And I would like some of those folks to actually be in the room at some point if this comes up, to make it say it to them, because I think that has a little bit different. So,
Manhattan and Riley County are a lot of government agencies.
Right.
Riley, K-State, and all the federal kinds of facilities there that do that. We would eliminate virtually half of our population from their eligibility to run.
Yeah.
Established.
so if you know folks who are serving in both capacities, let us know, and maybe we can get them to submit some testimony or help them.
Just curious, do you know, do many cities have partisan elections in Kansas?
One, right, John? You think for a mayor's race?
Used to, I don't think it does anymore. And Trey's one that says
It was the Lansing mayor's office, is my understanding.
I don't think it is.
Okay.
So none do right now.
Now, I'm gonna tell you right now, we have several cities who want partisan elections. And they just don't want to go on record and take a vote locally to do it. And they have gone to their legislators and said, yeah, this would be great, but we need you to do it at the state so we can blame you and not have to go on record. And I have told some of those folks individually, me being on the city council and speaking myself, I have looked at them and at least said to them, well, when you run for office, you got to put your name on stuff. Welcome to being an elected official. And if you're not willing to do that, then please don't run to the legislature every time you don't want to actually do something, locally. So I do want everyone to know, we do have some local elected officials who are talking to legislatures who support making them partisan and would like to see the legislature take action.
Okay.
So,
And I guess Spencer, my other kind of concern has been 625 cities in the state of Kansas. Partisan elections are only going to result in competitive elections in about 10 cities. Kansas City, Kansas, if you don't have a D on your name, probably not going to win the election. Any place west of 81, you don't have an R on your name, you're not going to win the election. So you're moving the election to August is what you're doing by going to partisan elections. Now, Topeka, you guys will have, Topeka and Wichita are really the two places, and maybe Overland Park, are really where it matters. Olathe, you gotta have an R on your name, or you're gonna have R chance. Well, okay, maybe northern Johnson County, you have to have a D.
Let's talk after November.
I mean, you're right, but that's not the argument we can make that's going to help us over there.
But for a lot of cities, it is the shift to August election.
Yeah. but you understand, some of them that's the one. I mean, that's the problem. I'm making some of their case for them. It sounds great. But thank you. You're right. That's why we're voting yes.
We don't need more conflict in the smaller communities, I guarantee you that.
Is there any organization pushing it, or are they just individual cities? Like, is it Veterans for Prosperity?
Mike Brown, chair of the Kansas Republican Party.
There you go.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
All right, sales tax and exemptions. This is on the list this year. We've always had some exemption issue. I've told every group to this point, if there's any sort of somewhat shift in any of our positions this year, I guess this is the closest that it comes. I don't think it's too drastic, but I at least recognize it's a slight shift of some degree. Cities should continue to be able to determine voter-approved local sales tax collection allocations. The legislature is granted authority to make decisions relating to statewide sales tax. Local voters vote on and are granted authority to make decisions regarding local sales taxes. Any sales tax exemptions considered by the legislature should only apply to the state portion of sales tax and not eliminate voter-approved local sales tax. This comes,
Does the county have a similar position?
I have no idea. Haven't talked.
Do the counties?
No. I mean,
They're meeting tomorrow,
Tomorrow.
KC and the county commission for legislative policy, so we'll talk about it.
where this has been born out of is last year, there were 100 or so sales tax exemptions introduced in the legislature, ranging from all kinds of things, every special interest group, and that's fine, every little group. It puts us in an odd position because truth is, I don't always want to walk into every room, and we shouldn't, and say, don't give those veterans a tax break, right? I mean, that may be the technically right fiscal position. It doesn't really go over well when you're sitting there in front of the committee. We did so we tried to make some argument, and some of these are larger. I mean, they will bring back next year a sales tax exemption on construction of utilities. Oh, right, that's coming. That's a $17 to $20 million tax break for utility companies, and that's fine. But we would like to be in a position to tell legislators, you were elected by people to represent the state of Kansas. Good for you. That's exactly what you're here to do. Stay in your life. We were elected by the local people to represent them locally. They also approved all these sales tax issues. Don't, undo what they have voted for. You want to give us some authority to make those exemptions? Great. We can talk about that later, but just exempt your part and leave ours. I mean, that's the argument. And it gives us some nuance in some of these to walk in and say that without just being the always yes or no only every time. And that's kind of why we've added this little change to it. So,
Spencer, with this averaging rate case, does this do anything to potentially cause blowback on our tax on utilities?
yeah, that's a good question. I've actually thought about that, and I don't know because I'm not sure how. I haven't talked to a lot of legislators. The couple of legislators I have talked to, and there's still you don't have to, but you may have talked. They really stayed out. They're sort of said, I don't know. I'm going to let it play. They told me, I'm going to let it play out and see what the KCC does and hear people's arguments. I haven't heard too many who want to say one way or the other. They need it or they don't need it. I mean, so I don't know the answer to that. No, I don't.
I'm sorry, I looked down here, big time with the averaging rate case.
Yeah, his question is whether it has an impact on like their request for the exemption on the sales tax on new construction.
No, well, not a new construction. My concern is right now, when utilities are tax exempt at the state level, but we pay local sales tax on utilities.
Yeah.
And that goes back to a compromise that was made in the 80s, I believe. So my concern is just highlighting that there's a separation between state and local. Does that all of a sudden cause somebody to go, oh, you don't pay state sales tax on utilities, but you're paying local sales tax. Hey, we could save 2.5%, up to 15.5% that's going to Westar with the rate case. And I'm just,
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess that I haven't really thought about that.
Is the sales tax, how it's written, is it about determining voter approved local sales tax? Because it's already determined.
No, it's already, which,
Yeah.
can I tell you, so do we need to change the word? Which I can tell you, by the way.
You need to be allowed to determine voter approved. It's already approved, it's already.
Oh, okay,
determined.
maybe the term is not the right.
Yeah. Is it
To,
yield or is it,
yeah, collect or.
yeah.
no, use it.
I know, there's gotta be a better word, determine.
I will change it to collect for now. I'm gonna highlight it and I will go back and find a much more better word.
Sorry.
but I see your point, yeah. By the way, most
How
of
about
you,
local voters should retain the right to impose taxes themselves?
actually retain would be a fine word.
Just continue, yeah.
Should continue. to
Something like that.
Retain voter approved,
Honoring vote.
retain
Yeah.
their themselves.
Lead with local voters should.
I will,
retain
I
the
will,
power.
I will wordsmith that, and I'll start with local voters, but I'll go back and change that. We'll post that on. I will tell you, half the people in that building don't understand that most of our sales tax are voter approved. And that was a fascinating conversation to have with them as they were talking about eliminating the food sales tax last year. They really had no idea. So just so you know, as you're talking to your local legislators on these issues, you might want to make sure they understand that these were voter approved.
And thus the lack of experience at city and county level before they become legislators.
There are times, I think you figure this out, by now. There are times I do make assumptions. I realize that was a really stupid assumption to make, that they all at least grasp that these were voter approved taxes. Silly me, I mean, but that really was very apparent during the food sales tax issue. We've left in here mental health and housing, our support for increased resources in those areas. I don't think there's a single city or community that isn't struggling with how to handle mental health or housing. I was at an event yesterday with Jury Leader Chris Croft, and he brought up mental health issues, and suddenly the realization that maybe that after the state closed all its hospitals, that's had a negative effect on Kansas.
Still out.
No, the word was still out on whether we should build new ones again. But he admitted that maybe that hasn't been great, but he said the word was still out on whether they should build new facilities again. And I'm sure part of that is there will be back next year. There was an outside group last year that brought an issue regarding homelessness. And in fact, there's an interim on that this year. There will be another bill of some sort. The bill that came forward last year basically penalized cities. Basically, with the state saying it's not a state problem, it's a city problem. And if you don't deal with it, we're going to come after you, whatever. But during that conversation, this really came to the forefront. I mean, it has in lots of other ways, but during the homelessness discussions that they're starting to hear, it's come to the forefront that part of this is a mental health issue and we have nowhere to put it. The other problem they're hearing is, and obviously we know where they stand on Medicaid expansion. That's fine. But the problem they're hearing is they are talking to law enforcement officials who are telling them, we show up, we identify a person, we even have a social worker with us. We can get them help within 24, 48 hours. Why can't I get them help after that? And the answer is because I can't get them any coverage. I have no way to get them any sort of payment or coverage again. And they're like, unless you wanted to expand Medicaid, and they say, well, I don't want to do that. Okay, what are you going to do then to help, right? I know for a fact they are having those conversations with law enforcement officials about the next step. And law enforcement is telling them we're frustrated because we're dealing with the same people. So what that's going to lead to, I have no idea, but just saying that those conversations are ongoing and with other groups besides us cities. There are some other groups who are trying to figure out how to.
Add a local anecdote that we've had 3 suicides in about 2 weeks in Grayville, which is a lot for a small population. Middle-aged men, super sad. Adding to the pile on of mental health still being very important. And we have to respond to these.
Well, right, and some don't, but I mean, that's what I mean, there's.
One of the things I was thinking about, is there a way to add in the mental health portion in there, something to do with, safety and police? type things?
If you go back later in our SMP, we do have
Yeah,
that, both in our policing section and our mental, we have a larger mental health
Right, I've
section
never seen
and
that.
housing. Yeah, and those are covered, and then there's a police portion of that too.
The state's gonna start realizing the cost of this. We got a law passed last year for counties. They were putting people who didn't commit a crime but had mental health issues in county jails. The counties were not being reimbursed for that. So now we've convinced them, so they will now reimburse the counties $100 a day for holding mental health patients because there's no room for them in the facility. So I don't know how that's gonna add up, but I know that's one that can be about 40% of the people in our jail there because of mental health issues, not because they committed a crime. There's just nowhere else for them to go. So,
That's pretty cheap holding. What, 100 days, 3,000 a month. And that's a lot cheaper than a mental health facility where you could actually.
Well, but to the state, it's gonna add up quicker than they realize. They're also not getting any treatment for the most part.
That's what I mean.
They make it, and there's some attorneys who might argue there's some constitutional violations, may or may not be occurring with those. I'm not gonna make that case, but there's some attorneys who will tell you.
Since we're on that issue, is there any other cities that are having issues with access to that initial mental health triage? Or we're seeing a massive increase over the last 3 months, and we're over 72 hours still waiting on a rep for adult mental services to show up from our home office an hour away to help out somebody. And it was with a comfort dishing out their own money to pay for pizza and water, and I was told that in person overnight, last week. So is there, I see the needing to throw money at it for additional beds, additional hospitals, things of that nature, but what about just frontline staff that actually help provide the treatment? Is that an issue that the state would add to that priority or not?
Happy to, I'm sure there's an issue that everyone's getting.
I guess I'm not asking if there's.
Yeah.
Are we seeing that enough that it would be worth adding that or not? Or does this adequately cover that? And we had a discussion with, I think it was Senator Masterson, Senator Bowers, Senator Alley last Friday, and I asked the same question to them, and the response that I got was, we threw $60 million this last year, it should be fine, and I said, where did it go? It's not helping anything. No answer, so.
Wonder if we should talk to our friends at some of the mental health organizations. I'll bet you they have some language to that point that we could borrow. Or, as opposed to us trying to I bet you several of them have.
And then on, I guess, an aside to that, even not just the responsiveness, but the proactiveness. So we ran into this year, we've had an opportunity to hire 4 new police officers this year. And the wait time to get their psych evals before hiring was 4 to 6 months out with upon mental health. So we ended up driving them from Concordia to an office in Kansas City to psych evals and get them hired.
The mental health, like in Johnson County, which has funding and resources, it's just a hiring staffing issue. I mean, I think the county commissioners would approve as many mental health correspondents as could be found, but the problem is with the pipeline. I don't know what the state would do about that.
Well, I mean, I'm a licensed social worker to begin with, that's my trade. And I can tell you, I can go get a job making a tremendous amount more money. I mean, they're trying to hire people doing psych evals for $40,000 a year. And so the reality of it is that a social worker can't make it on that. You just can't make it on that. So you're losing social workers left and right. You can do those psych evals. I mean, but you can't retain them for, $15 an hour. I'm a master, and I can't. It just doesn't make any sense.
Where are you and your colleagues working at? I forget what organization you said you were, like,
Yeah.
what jobs are they taking?
Yeah, not these. I mean, and that's the problem is that if you look, you could telehealth, you do telehealth for a tremendous amount. Yeah.
I do appreciate it being brought up though, because even Appling had to go to Kansas City to get one of ours hired sooner than we could have. Would have had to wait.
Well, Spencer knows the city of Topeka is evaluating what they cannot do with homelessness. And we would have an interest to have an interest in the region. Representative our campus committee, I know we had not well thought out proposal in front of it, but that was brought by contract lobbyists. I think Francis is willing to engage the discussion. But I think we all have restrictions based upon the Constitution, U.S. state, that we're trying to. But that is a priority of the city.
So if there's some consensus, I don't know if we vote, that we'd like some language to address the actual staffing I'm fine with that, but let me see what I can borrow from some of our friends who do this every day before we try, and I can even send it to a few, for review, and we can add it and discuss it at the conference, but I'm happy to do that. Because, yeah, you're right, even our mental health section, it doesn't address that specific, the staffing issue. You're right, it is kind of a more, at least throw money at it, and you're right, a lot of cities are just having, what can the state do to actually focus that assistance?
So.
And resources for the first responders.
Yeah.
Because we have a good stop at Abilene now, and we're seeing that exact increase in problem.
We received a grant to have some access for a little bit, I don't recall where it came from. But for a year or two first, to help them with our police first responders.
So do we have consensus to add some language on that? Nod heads.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, the last two.
About housing, is it sufficient to just say we support all housing?
So it is here, and there is, the difference between the conversation we had on mental health was, we don't get even as specific. We do have more housing
Okay.
later in the SMP that is very specific to actual programs that we want supported and expanded. This is the short as a priority, but yeah, the housing does later relate to very specific programs we want supported. It's much more specific than the mental health piece. Sales tax revenue in star bond districts, this was an issue last year, whereas some of our star bond friends who, as the sales tax on food goes down, some of them have a lot of food sales, creating that star bond issue. It was half addressed, not even half, it was 10% addressed by the legislature last year, and that they gave everyone a 1-year reprieve. They did not extend anything beyond that. I know that it will be coming back. We know that it makes a big difference in some star bond districts, and we know that there's some desire by the legislature to address it. They just couldn't get there last year among some of their other conversations. So we've kept it as a priority because we have several districts and cities that will be very negatively impacted if that doesn't get done. Big bills will be due. Water, access to water is paramount for the growth and viability of communities. Government at all levels should pursue the conservation, protection, and development of current and future water supplies to ensure access to clean, safe, and affordable water for all Kansans. We support state action in consultation with municipal providers to address surface and groundwater resources. We obviously have more in the a little bit more in the SMP2 on water. We've been probably more heavily involved in the last year on this issue as a league than probably years prior, thanks to Wendy. I throw her into the water on this one every time, go become our water expert. Nathan and Wendy and myself, we did meet with the water office yesterday, had a meeting with them. I have talked with legislators often on this issue. It ain't going away. I think
Well, it is.
well, yeah.
Thanks.
All right. And the last one that is a new addition added by the committee last week is LAVTR. The state legislature, as required by statutes, should fund the local ad valorem tax reduction program. This has been in our SMP for years. The committee last week said that asked and voted to put it into the priorities at this time, one for consideration. There will be a large push this year. There already is by the counties to focus this issue. They have put together a toolkit, which is available, and we're going to kind of mirror some of that after we had these conversations from the league. You will start to see, in fact, you're already seeing it. You saw it last week here in good old Shawnee County. They had their R&R hearing. They want to raise it, and 2 of their commissioners are pretty conservative Republicans who voted to go above it, but they both came out with statements that said, we wouldn't have to do this if the state of Kansas would fund LAVTR. And so the county messaging is already out there. It's starting to be used. And again, there will be a heavy push. You will see last year, Vic Miller put something forward already. And so it's coming. The problem we have on this issue is that we're all trying to get past is we have a House Speaker and a Senate President who will stand in any room with any group, public, private, and say, it ain't happening. Hell no, I don't trust those cities to spend it the way they're supposed to. We're not doing it. I mean, they don't try to hide that one. They don't try to soft shoe that one. So whether it'll happen or not, I don't know, but you are going to see a large push all across the state. And I also know that we have several members. I mean, I think everybody supports it. We have several who are getting more and more vocal. We have a county who would like to sue the state for not following their own law. I do find it humorous to hear as it relates to this issue. As Brad pointed out, there's been some talking points lately, particularly as to some of the social issues, but that they want to hold city officials accountable. If they violate the law, then they should be held accountable, including jail and fines. Well, how about we hold the state legislature accountable for not following their own laws, right? So we may see if that comes back in, but it's here, it's going to be big this year. And so Mike may want to have a county perspective.
So we do that toolkit. I urge you to go to the Casey website and it's called LABTR. That's the toolkit. We've got a whole bunch of stuff there. I'm going to frequently ask questions. We've got history. And we also talk about, it's not just LABTR. Think back, it's issue of equipment, it's mortgage revenue fee, it's the extra work they dumped on license for counties on the license, on the licensing of vehicle departments. They've just been dumping on locals for a long time, but now they've got, $2-3 billion in surplus, so we're thinking we can afford to do this. We've started our ground game. I've gotten every county commissioner I represent armed questions to every budget hearing that they have. I'm asking them to bring this issue up. And it's working. We've gotten some press coverage in the Pittsburgh Morning Sun, Southeast Kansas. We've got coverage down in Bartlett County. K-Man Radio in Manhattan interviewed the speaker about it last week. One of our commissioners brought that up. Yeah. He's not for it. That's right. And the governor, quite honestly, we've met with her staff. She's not wild about the idea either. So this could be just a year to educate people and get, my strategy is get people really worked up about it so that your taxpayers bring up this issue in every legislative copy, every legislative form. Had some success with that in past years with the railroads in Wichita work. Got people mad and they start talking about it and the legislature then gets on the defensive. So that's kind of the strategy we're using. I look forward to you guys joining KC and the ACCA to help you try to get that done.
I do think there will be value to some degree as you heard from Brad, and we know property tax is going to be a huge issue. And there is a mechanism on the books at the state level to help us with that problem that they've chosen not to utilize for 20 years. That's their choice. But I do think it's okay, especially as that becomes to remind them of that tool. And if it's going to stay on the books, they need to use it. And by not doing that, to remind them you are collecting a portion of tax from the citizens today, you're supposed to be remitting back to them for this purpose, and you're not doing it. And so that helps when we talk with them a little bit about it. And they've gotten to the point, and I think why some of this push is good, they have gotten to the point where since it hasn't been done for 20 years, and none of them have had to worry about it for the most part. There's a few who were around 20 years ago, but not many. They do blow it off pretty easy. Oh, we haven't done it for 20 years, whatever. Well, we need to bring them back to not just being able to dismiss it as a whatever. We've just done it that way.
I also point out this is a breach of contract because cities gave up a lot in exchange for LABTR. I mean, cities used to have the ability to do local liquor tax, local gas tax, cigarette tax. Cities gave all that up in exchange for, all right, the state of Oregon, then we'll share back a percentage with you guys. And so they're breaching the contract, in my view. I know the league tracks this, but if you go back 20 years, $3.5 billion local governments have not gotten because of the legislature.
Jay Hall was on TV the other night.
Oh, was he?
He gave his pitch and response back from legislative leadership was, yeah, we got it on.
I would have expected them to just rescind the statute and then just keep, it stays there.
That's possible. They tried to do that a few years ago, just take it off the books, and we managed to stop that. The county that, Leavenworth County, that's ready to sue, and I'm trying to keep them calm, because if you file a lawsuit, you're gonna block this whole thing. They will just come back in January, take it off the books. So don't do that.
Okay.
But it's an uphill battle, I admit it, but I think it's one worth fighting, so.
For all those reasons and many more, it was requested to be put in priorities, and so it's now there for everyone's consideration as we move forward in the process. So that is the end of our legislative priorities. So at this point, Anything you like, anything you don't like, anything you want added? I know where to go to first, no problem.
I'm asking about the ambulance attendant cause. We have that later on down, and last year was part of our legislative priority. Last year, if you recall, Senator Stroud proposed some legislation to try to help make it so we could lessen the requirements for the drivers of ambulances to match, and that's what state statute allows right now, so we're in no need for that legislation. Where the issue lies is that the Board of EMS policies are too restrictive. They require an EMS certified attendant to be able to drive the ambulance in addition to the one in the box. What the issue that's causing then is staffing issues to get people down the road for both 911 calls and transfers. The legislation with Senator Stroud did not pass. She made a deal with the Board of EMS. Board of EMS said they'd work with cities and solve the issue. I remember we got to August, I think of last, earlier this year. Board of EMS was getting ready for a meeting. My fire chief and I decided we were going to go to that meeting and help advocate for that change. We were denied access to that meeting. They were told to not say anything to the league about this. Our stance on the issue and what we were advocating for, which I know is a lie. I know that Spencer had shared all that information that was there, providing testimony that day. So we couldn't get access. In addition, the Board of EMS staff had massive turnover, so we haven't been able to get on their agenda since then. It's still an issue. I noticed from our local fire EMS department, the volume has tripled of transfers that we've had to turn down due to lack of appropriate certified staffing. I won't let my staff falsify records, but I do know there are other agencies around the state that are doing what's best for patients that are taking the risk of falsifying records. A couple of them are getting caught and getting fined. So it's still an issue. And I know that we would increase our staffing pool. We would have access to more reserve volunteer firefighters, for example, that are trained to drive ambulances and fire trucks and get that ambulance down the road and get patients the care that they need in a quicker manner. If Board of EMS would relax the policy and match what state statute says. So my request of this group is, would it be appropriate, would you have any interest of elevating that ambulance attendant up to legislative priorities again this year, because the Board of EMS has not acted on their promise to Senator Stroud that they would address this specific issue.
So from my perspective, and that's what I said, I have no issue putting it back in legislative priorities. I think the only reason we removed it from last year was we're not sure there's any pending legislation. That doesn't mean it's not a priority. There may be more of a regulatory issue, although and I had this discussion with the advisor last year is, and I said, we'll meet in the next couple of weeks and sort of devise our plan of attack. I don't think it's appropriate at this point for the league to let the EMS board know, wait a minute, we've had these conversations. You haven't done anything about it. The session is coming up. It's time. And if they aren't, although it may not move forward, I'm willing to walk across the street and basically introduce a bill, because what Verizon talked about is they're exceeding the law. The EMS board is exceeding the law. We can add a provision to current law that says they can create these rules and regs, but in this portion, they cannot exceed the law, right, on that specific piece. And that's kind of what it got down to last year. And then Senator Straub, based on the promise from the EMS board that they would deal with it, she pulled it at the last minute, which kind of stunk because it was going to pass. The fact, I think it was unanimously passed that committee. They were all like, yes, we got to help our local communities. So it's up to you folks. But just for what's worth, I have no issue putting it back in the priorities, and then Amy and whoever else wants to join will go fight the good fight with the board before the session and see what their responses are, so we can.
And I guess in full disclosure too, the Board of EMS did set up a waiver program, because that was one of the conversations. But it is limited to 911 calls only, so it doesn't address the transfer issue. And it's limited only to basic life support. It doesn't cover advanced life support. So if you need to have an IV step in you while you're going down the road from critical access hospital to higher level of care, you still have to have the EMS certified attendant driving the vehicle, even though they're not with anything.
I need to go back and look at the testimony from last year, because I don't remember who it was. Somebody stood up last year and did a very good job of explaining why their waiver was total garbage. It was basically a waiver in name only, and it had so many restrictions on it that it essentially, and in fact, I think the EMS board even admitted that because their whole point was nobody's used this waiver. Right? He got up there and said, well, let me explain to you why. It's literally impossible to get this waiver. You've made it so hard. So yes, they hide behind this waiver, but they put up every roadblock to it.
I don't think it affects Manhattan, but the falsifying of records, and if it's broader than, ought to be looked at in some way.
Thoughts on moving it up to priorities?
I would concur, coming from a small community that has a very competent and a very good volunteer ambulance service. We have all kinds of issues that we have to interact with Sutton County in order to get people transferred. So, yeah, I would concur that the service needs to be looked at.
Yeah, one, you want to make one?
I'll make the motion to be moved that up to a priority level.
Okay, motion made to move it up to priority. Your second, all right, second by Amy. Any questions on the matter? All those in favor say aye.
All right.
Any opposed, same sign. So, awesome. Moving up.
Thoughts on priorities? I didn't say this year. I said this last year. I came into this process last. I've been here a year now. Wow, that's kind of amazing. You didn't fire me or anything. That's good. I did say, so I kind of came as midway last year, and I did say, always happy. We really do mean this. I know there's other organizations that say it, maybe don't. This really is a bottom-up document. It is not a staff says it should be this. We try to convince you that's what it is so we can go over there. Because I can't make those arguments over there if we generate everything and hope you're on board. It's easier, much easier for us to do our job when we can actually look at legislators say, this is membership driven, this is what the cities need and what they want. But I did say we very much tried to make sure that our priorities every year are things we know are coming, bills we are going to support or issues we're really going to have to fight. I have said before, and it's always important because home preemption is a big issue, but home rules, it's fine being in priorities, but I always say, well, that should just be, doesn't need to be in priorities to some degree. It's what we are. We are home rule. That is, we're the League of Kansas Home Rules. So that's kind of our, but it still always stays in priorities at number one for that, obviously. And preemption is becoming more.
Other thoughts on legislative priorities, questions, or other things that we might want to move in here? Yes, sir.
A question, whether now or later, for John Goodyear, to give us an update on asset forfeiture in the news this week.
You got that PowerPoint ready, John?
I can talk through it real quick. Is that timely now or?
We need the update, or we want to do it now, or want to get through priorities and then we can.
Up to you.
Or you think that needs to be priority?
Or we can do it after we get to general discussion.
Depends on what's the bill.
I think it depends on what the bill is. So we
Yeah.
the committee's only met once. We meet again Thursday. My read of the committee right now is that I don't think we're going to reach an agreement on a recommendation to take to the judicial council. At the end of last meeting, we tried to figure out what the low hanging fruit was. We didn't identify any low hanging fruit. So the wish list from those individuals that would like to do away with civil asset forfeiture is to ultimately make it a criminal process, make the criminal proceeding across the board. And they do that by increasing the burden of proof, shifting the burden of proof, and by guaranteeing a right to counsel. All of those don't work for a number of different reasons. Specific to our policy on civil asset forfeiture, we have a statement in here that any proceeds should remain with local governments. That is the one big thing I voiced at that first meeting. Is that any proposal to shift the proceeds from civil asset forfeiture to the state general fund, like there has been over the last 2 years, is a non-starter for cities and counties. So I don't think that's going to come up in conversation, but we'll see. So I guess the update is there hasn't been a lot of progress, and our ultimate position, I suppose, as a league, is that what the system we have right now is fine. It works. There are some minor fixes that I think could be made. For for example, there's US Supreme Court, Timms v. Oregon. That has to do with certain, even in a civil process, certain forfeitures being unconstitutionally permissive because what they seized was too much. In that case specifically, this individual was a low-level drug dealer and they seized an $87,000 vehicle. And the court found that was constitutionally excessive. So they created a test for determining excessiveness. Kansas law already had that protection in it. We already have excessiveness protections. There's an idea to put in a proceeding or put in standards for excessiveness. That might be an area where we can work and where we can see improvement in the law. But as of right now, there has not been much progress. We'll see what happens at the meeting on Thursday. We were asked to take a look at a complete revamp, which again would make a criminal asset forfeiture instead of civil asset, civil process. The bill is confusing. It doesn't work. It has less than half the support in the room, so it's not going to get very far. That's what we're going to spend a couple hours discussing on Thursday. But I've been updating the city attorney's group. So these are the ones that individuals that deal with civil asset forfeiture the most, and we'll be sending an update out to them following the meeting on Thursday. But my read of the situation right now is that there is not much progress.
Okay, two-step case, 3 or 4 states around us have something for marijuana. More than some $25 million appropriated last year. Not a joke. Even though
Other policy.
Well, the good news is this next part won't take long because we don't have a bunch of new stuff that we filled this SMP with. So there's only just a couple things I want to point out that there's some new additions this year. And 2 of them we've already reviewed. So that's half of them right there. We already reviewed the sales tax exemption, which is now under the tax, which is also under the taxation section. We have added under transportation, part regarding electric charging stations. Any fees or taxes imposed on charging stations remitted to the state should be put into the special highway fund, not the general fund. We don't have a position as to whether they should or should not add additional fees, charges, taxes, et cetera, to electric charging stations, but there's been discussion of that. And so if that ends up happening, we want to make sure, because one of the bills that was discussed was to put the money in the general fund. Well, if the goal is to reduce money lost from the gas tax, which goes into the special highway fund, which we can access and actually goes down to the cities, we want to make sure that that money actually stays there. So that is the reason that that's been added this year. Matching funds, we support allocating surplus state fund revenues to cities to maximize federal discretionary grant funds from programs such as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Inflation Reduction Act, and others. This, again, is somewhat obvious, but we want to reiterate it's becoming more and more important, the use and importance of matching funds and programs.
Do we need, and we talked last Thursday about being less specific. Can we just put a period after grant funds?
Oh, yeah, that's
Grant
right.
funds, and not necessarily call out the.
That's right, because others kind of covers that anyway. That's right, the committee.
There are probably some obvious examples that I'm not thinking of, but this is happening now.
We did create the fund. So
Yeah, and the committee last week did say, again, it's kind of like somewhere else, we don't need to mention every program because if we miss one, then like, well, you didn't say, right?
But
It comes up tomorrow.
before the infrastructure bill, like, is there a precedent in the state to give out state dollars for the local?
it created that program last year.
Okay, so no.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing.
Right, that's why
Okay.
we wanted to make sure it was included this year. It's kind of a new territory for the state.
Didn't know if I was missing out. Previous years, great.
We did add to the solid waste provision that this is very simple. home rule powers of cities to dispose of and manage municipal solid waste should not be restricted. This includes recycling, electronic waste, and composting programs. Very simple change.
Okay, real quick on water. The state continues to KDHE on water planning, continues to be very slow in approving water plans. I've had this conversation since I worked for the league. The state takes forever to okay. Simple stuff the state has to okay, not funded by state. I don't know. I continue to think this is a problem for us, especially larger cities that have city engineers on staff. You know, why are we saying Mother May I on every water line, almost every water line extension? And Dan Clare comes back and says, you've got to add a, water faucet here, or your engineer misspelled a word. And we're waiting 4 or 5 months to get that back from KDHE. It just seems like overstep and something that, keep it, I don't want to say this too loud because I don't want to make Dan mad at us. But at the same time, it seems to be a problem.
To that question last year, we introduced and then what was passed, the legislation, Senate Bill 120, that essentially allows you to have a professional engineer on staff to just submit those plans to the this is an FYI that they're certified. If you have then you guys can now do your own work in that sense. So that should hopefully really expedite the process. There's a couple of other elements too, that was.
Thank you. I'm sorry I missed that somewhere.
That's why we have these meetings. We added to the abandoned and blighted housing portion, which was already there. We just added the sentence that cities should continue to retain the ability to manage vacant property registry programs to counter blight, since that was obviously a very specific issue last year, which is that was not outlined in the NCP. All right, that's it on the state issues. That was it. That was all the new. And then we only had 3 things to the federal issues. Collective bargaining, we added the mandatory federal collective bargaining would preempt state and local law, requiring every city to collectively bargain with police officers, firefighters, correction officers, and EMTs. Cities are proud of the state's home rule tradition and believe collective bargaining should be a local option. We added something as it relates to the Federal Inflation Reduction Act. Federal funding from the IRA is important to support city services, economic recovery, and energy resilience. The league supports programs that protect the health and safety of Kansans while balancing municipal costs. And then the last 2 relate to infrastructure. One is lead copper pipe mitigation. The EPA has issued regulations requiring all public water supply systems to develop a lead service line inventory of public water systems and privately owned service lines. The federal government should appropriate funds to mitigate exposure to lead. Municipal water lines should be allowed to utilize the least expensive yet effective methods for reducing exposure to lead in drinking water. And the last one is the word I don't even try to pronounce. Apparently, I'll just call them. I don't know what the hell we're supposed to call them, to be honest with you, but PFAS, I guess. Cities deliver essential public services that do not involve the manufacture or use of PFAS. Cities are passive receivers of material containing PFAS that permeate the water supply, wastewater treatment process, stormwater, biosolids management, and solid waste management. Any action designating certain PFAS compounds as hazardous substances must be accompanied by relief that allows Kansans to rely on the supportability of the essential public services. We ask for statutory relief from liability for owners and operators of passive receiver facilities. These are obviously 2 issues that are right in everybody's forefront at the moment, especially at the federal level. And so we wanted to make sure that we're included in our federal issues. And in fact, in the coming month or so, probably late September, early October, Wendy and I will be having meetings with our congressional delegation in their offices and talking about some of those issues. So that is all the new stuff, which means that is our SMP. It is presented to you. So we change it again. Right the next meeting.
All right, I think lunch is here. So we're going to take a 20-minute break for lunch, which would put us back here. Let's add a few minutes, 11:50 or 12:15. Is it right outside?
Yes, so everybody can head out to the kitchen and so all of you have been here at least for some of this and we'll put the message up there and get things started when we come back.
Yeah.
Leads up yourself.
Hey, we're getting there, we're getting there.
That's good.
Oh, Richard is great.
That's your city manager right now.
He is till the end of the year.
And so testimony is great.
We've got until.
Everybody's gonna, this is.
Oh, I know.
We thought we had them only till our budget process.
Oh, I know. There's always-
Thankfully, we-
Oh,
And it's.
We already had. Now, we already had spots on that.
Not aware. It's not in the.
Get back, you're still eating, finish. We're still doing it up here, so. Continue to eat and, we'll get cranking back up. So Spencer, I think we're at the general discussion on the legislative.
There are, so there's a couple pieces of this, and I think you and John talked about one, there's a couple things. I guess we'll do a couple things here, we'll roadmap on this one. We got a couple issues that are not directly on the SMP, but we think are either addressed or don't need to be. We'll cover those real quick. I'm just gonna give you a couple things from my perspective that we're looking out for heading in this session. At that point, we'll open it up to just questions, comments, concerns, or anything you want to talk about regarding what we think on the session. So with that, so I guess we had three things. The first was what is not in here, and I'll start with the lowest level one. There will be another bill this year to eliminate the 3 mile zone. It may be reduced to a mile or something. That may be the bill. We don't have that specifically in this SMP. We don't plan to put it in there. We know it's coming. We think we already have enough in here that says we would obviously oppose that for a variety of reasons. But you will hear about that issue. We plan to oppose that issue, but we are not included in the SMP.
For annexation or zoning.
It basically we just eliminate the 3 mile zone that they're running with the city and county. It's from a Topeka legislator who's angry about it. And
Yeah.
it's fine. So
Central County has we were limited to what our comprehensive plan projection might be, and they took away the 3 mile area of influence, so to speak. And so I'd be interested to know what a little bit more about that, where that might go, and will that supersede something like Central County's put in place?
yeah, it went absolutely nowhere last year, both
Yeah.
Senate and House, but it may get a little more if it comes back as well, let's just, instead of eliminating completely, if it comes back as, let's just make it 1 mile. That might get a few and say, oh, well, that sounds like a good compromise, right? So I think there's some tweaking that may happen.
And just for the record, because it was some folks from Lyon County, we do not have extraterritorial zoning right now, as much as they
Yeah.
tried to, we have not gone forward with that because they opposed it, so it worked.
Yeah.
Their opposition worked to it, because right now we do not have extraterritorial jurisdiction in Oregon.
Well, I point out to folks that during both those hearings, not a single county came to support it. That kind of helped too. The county was like, no, we're good. We're good. Now, part of it is frustrations with county commissioners bleeding over into, if they won't work with us or stop things and do their part, we're just gonna go eliminate it because we're angry at the cities. And there was a lot of that too. Like, I'm mad at my county commissioners, and we've talked to those people after this. Be mad at them, but go yell at them. So, they're your problem, not us.
Where not all member cities are aligned on their position or.
3 mile, I have not heard of any city that thinks we should not oppose it. They may be indifferent in the sense that, well, it's not a big deal out here, I really don't. Now, we explain to them, I mean, even counties try to explain to folks, there's so much intertwined right now in terms of what you have put infrastructure and agreements and utility issues, that just to eliminate it, nobody knows what that would look like. Nobody has any clue what that does to any of those agreements that are longstanding. I mean, I stood up in committee last and said, if you're really serious about this, which I hope you're not, you can't just pass this in 1 second. You gotta study the living, what out of this thing, and know what this real impact is to everybody. Because it is big, like, it's got a lot. And so it's not in there. We talked about today, the second thing was the constitutional amendment that would cap, Brad mentioned it, that would cap valuations at 4%, SCR 1611. That is not in our statement specifically that we oppose that. We believe there is plenty already in here if you go through our tax statements that say we absolutely oppose that. And I know there will be many other groups that oppose it. We've had some of those conversations with the Realtors Association. We had a presentation last week from appraisers. There's gonna be a lot of opposition for different reasons, but we don't have that specifically in this, again, in the SMP, but as it comes up, based on our current language and tax positions, we will very likely oppose that. At the very least, we will be neutral with what here's what it really does. There's a case to be made. How we want to craft this and say it in public doesn't really impact, to some degree, impacts valuations and markets, but we're still gonna get our money. Like, you know, and so if that's your goal, it doesn't really do that. It's not how I want to say it, but I mean, that's kind of an underlying. John can,
So, yeah, in meeting with the Senate staffer last week, this came up. And I said, what's the rhetoric that goes along with this? He's like, well, it's gonna lower property taxes. It's not going to. So that's why it gets out of the Senate. And that's what the majority, the 2/3 majority that sends it through believes that this is a method to lower property. And I guess it does lower your state property taxes. But that doesn't account for much on your tax bill. So I think I'm neutral with a just educational position, like Spencer said. It's not we're gonna get our money either way. It's this isn't the relief that you think it is.
I mean, it sounds simple on its face. You cap these valuations at 4, I mean, I get it. It's always easy to draw the very linear line. Well, valuations across the state the last couple of years have been up on average of 15%. That's too high. If we cap it at 4, that won't happen anymore. Problem solved, right? Boy, that really sounds simple, and you can walk around during the campaign and sell that I've lowered your property taxes until a couple of years go by and people realize my property taxes haven't actually gone down, but the value of stuff hasn't really gone up now much either. What the hell is going on, right? And so I think that's the educational piece we will focus on is if you do this, this is what can happen. And again, the appraiser laid out some very interesting things, impacts it can have that we found interesting, and we'll probably add to those pieces that we just said. Okay, so at most we'll take an educational approach of here's what you're doing.
This is gonna be a big topic tomorrow when the KAC meets for their legislative policy committee. See, in Leavenworth County, it's unanimously in support of this. They're gonna make a presentation trying to get the whole KAC on board. Counties are divided, so I'll let you know tomorrow kind of what the commissioner is going to decide. But there's another issue out there, and Sean, the president brought this up. The KCK Chamber for several years has had in their platform that you go to a rolling 3 or 5 year average on property valuation. So it keeps those spikes down, kind of flattens them out. It's kind of the way they do ag. Kansas Chamber was going to introduce that. I'm not sure that they are this year, kind of on behalf of the KCK Chamber, but that's something else to watch. And I haven't studied enough to know the big pros and cons of that, but it basically flatten out those sharp increases, because some people, they got my valuation went up 52% this year. How's that? So flatten that out. I'm not sure exactly, again, all the ramifications of that, but I'll just throw that out there. That could get brought up and likely could by some groups. So.
I think you're gonna have some House members, especially in an election year, wanting to do something and feeling some pressure to support this because, again, it sounds like it's going to do something. I think the big key, that plan has some downfalls too, but it's better than a constitutional amendment that caps. And so I think if we can give some House members some alternative, look, we understand not doing nothing or suggesting nothing's not an option. We get it. So some options like that, at least let them, go back to their Senate colleagues and say, I get what you're trying to do, but I got a different idea, and then can go out and talk to their constituents, say, look, I get what they're trying to do, but let's try this. I mean, we're going to need to give some of those House members some alternative suggestions to at least be able to have as a conversation piece when they talk to folks. And so I think ideas like that are kind of.
So Mike said that he hasn't really looked into this. I don't know that it's your job to do that, but is it like the league who's looking at what that bid could look like? So, before we do introduce, hey, this alternative, because I'm with you, I think frankly, politically, I think that's the only way that we can go. But who is evaluating what that would look like to cities?
There are groups out there that we've talked to, and we may take a look at some of those numbers, but the appraisers are looking at that. They're having, again, we're kind of in that time of year where lots of groups are having these meetings right now. So we've talked to some of these other organizations who are like, oh, we're doing the same thing you are. We'll know a lot more in October, right? Or in September, as we get into September. But I can tell you there are some other groups looking at what those numbers would look like, including looking at what the 4%, there's some math being done on what the 4% would do long-term to valuations of property tax really. And so all that math is being done as we speak by bankers and realtors and appraisers. And so we'll do a little bit of that, but we'll steal a lot of their homework. Use it for our own.
The realtors are going to oppose this.
Yeah, very much so.
I think the rolling average would be helpful to level out some of the spikes for cities. I mean, we went from 5% growth to 16% growth, and it's almost worse to have to deal with that double-digit 5%.
No, the spikes have been the worst. The last 2 years, those spikes have just been, and I get it. I mean, I've gone to a couple of realtor roundtables in the last few, and they may be right. Our market was a little low, and this is it working itself out. That's great for the economy and for the market. It stinks for those of us who then have to sit in these meetings and get those emails, and you're messing up my property taxes. Telling them, well, this is just the market correcting itself, doesn't go very far, right? It's not really good. So yeah, something like that would at least ensure, because essentially it wouldn't guarantee, but almost would, we really would see a 18% spike in 1 year using the rolling.
I mean, and the other half of it is, why can't we just cut the mill levy? Because that's the responsible, have this cut your mill levy in response to it, is that we've had such inflationary costs across the board, and we were missing 25% of our police department this time last year. We had to step up and we had to massively increase salaries in order to retain and recruit police officers. So, that's the other half of it is, what do you want us to do? People are saying no to the salary that we were offering. Do you want police officers to come?
Well, in construction materials,
Yeah.
I mean, to build anything or to find a contractor, I remember Nikki talking about the swimming pools, like to find anybody to do anything, not just our own staff, it's just incredibly expensive.
Thank you, Arthur.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only reason we were able to afford to pay these.
1 or 2 times, Great.
Yeah.
So we're working on that issue, but we didn't feel a need to specifically put any sort of opposition or point to it. We think we've got that covered, and issues why we would have concerns or want to educate people. So.
Was that 1611?
It's 1611. Yeah, it was introduced to 1610 at 3%, and then they brought it back really quick within 24 hours or 4 after that failed by 2 votes. There's 2 more to vote for it. 1611 was 4%, and it kicked out. So go believe it. And then the last thing is initiative and referendum. We've had a request. Kansas has neither initiative or referendum. We've had a request to at least consider it. That request, full disclosure, came from the legislator, a moderate Republican who's frustrated with some things they'd like to see get done, and pretty much since they won't do it over there, figure the people can get it done. We gave a big pros and cons. Those remind people, on the one hand, it can be great. At this point, I told the legislator, if you want to get what you're talking about, which is good for all, that's awesome. It also legalized shrooms in Colorado. So, it's a double-edged sword. And so we have never, to my knowledge, I don't know if the league's ever taken a position, and I don't feel a need to. I don't know if John or Nathan or you might want to weigh in on that, but we don't feel at this time a need to weigh in on it. But we figured we needed to bring it up today since it was brought forward by a legislator.
When we do have it at the local level, people can petition.
Yeah.
So.
And I hate it.
I mean, and I guess.
It's not nothing.
It's not nothing, but it exists, and we rarely see it used as a tool at the local level.
It takes the pressure off.
Yeah, hey, you can go that direction. When I would go to state directors meetings, just horror stories of how they got, well, if you don't do this, we're just gonna take it to a referendum. And of course, in California, where, people sign almost anything. But, I've been out in California during election season, and without some sort of incredibly high bar, California will have 25 different propositions on their ballot. And how does anybody go to the ballot and make any sort of intelligent choice on how to vote? I mean, I think it's dangerous.
And they're still stuck with some of those.
Yes.
They passed
Well, and
historically.
certainly we can discuss the policy merits or negatives. But on one hand, we have the league and cities in particular that converge so many different elements. And the policy issues that we end up touching are largely everything but education. It is important that we stick to the priorities as best we can. And it's great if the state lawmakers want to have a conversation on this. I just have a hard time understanding where the leagues and you are a critical voice having that discussion.
To your point, Trey, we've got, the state wants it, that's up to them to decide if they.
As heavy-handed as the legislature is, I don't expect them to want.
No.
That'd be a shock.
Especially because, to be honest, I think the primary issue for this legislator is Medicaid expansion.
Yeah.
And they believe if we had it, we would have Medicaid expansion, because people would vote. I mean, right, I don't know what, but I mean, I really think that is a primary issue for this person, but knowing that, those who are opposed to it would say, well, then I'm never gonna vote for this, because I know we're gonna use it for.
Yeah, the last governor that I can recall that supported this was going to back 7 years.
Yeah, Governor Finney actually got it to the floor and it failed on a vote. We looked that up in our.
Missouri, those of you that live in northeast part of Missouri, has it, and it's a big fight. The legislature, the General Assembly is now trying to put restrictions on getting those on the ballot. They're trying to increase the number of signatures, but right now they're trying to get abortion protection amendment in the Constitution, kind of like Kansas did. There are 12 different initiatives that are being reviewed right now. I mean, you can't vote on 12 different initiatives, so which one gets decided if you vote against this ballot? So.
So those are the three issues that we know are coming. We know we will be actively engaged in. We believe our SEC covers them or doesn't need to, and we wanted to have this one. Yeah.
Sorry if I missed it, but the city administrator asked me, what's on medical marijuana? Is that just not on anyone's radar?
So it would pass. If it hit the floor today of the House and Senate, it would pass. So we'd have 63-21 governing sign. As long as Ty Masterson is Senate president, it ain't happening.
So it's just, I can safely say probably nothing, no movement on it this session is expected.
Correct. I mean, there will be efforts to do so, but it will be sent to Fed and State again. Senator Thompson will make sure it goes nowhere. He might hold yet another hearing where he gives the pros like 5 minutes and the cons 2 days. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. And then it'll die, and then senators like Rick Plus will say, oh, even though I've supported this for 4 years, I've seen the light, I'm against it now. I mean, that's what happened.
When is this term over?
Masterson?
Yeah.
Well, it should be, if we hold the history, this would be his last year as Senate President. Who knows?
So like maybe in 2025, they will come back.
Maybe.
It's funny because anecdotally in the community, at least in Northeast Johnson County, I feel like people haven't been talking about it as much. I'm like, are they just going to Missouri and getting it? People are just straight.
Yeah, it's just.
And maybe Colorado for, like, people are not talking about it because they're just finding it.
And Hawkins is not gonna take it up in the House again, because he has told people, I passed the bill. And they did. We passed the bill and Hawkins worked on it and it got out of the House 2 years ago. He's like, we did our part. If the Senate's not gonna do anything, I'm not wasting any time on my side of the chamber. If it's gonna be bottleneck, we're out, but it would pass.
Am I right that it's been like, I don't know.
Well, it has to, that's why, because they realized the momentum has died
Okay.
and it's not going anywhere.
Okay.
So some of the groups who were very active the last couple of years have just said, they'll still fight it, but the momentum's gone. At the end of the election.
I'm like, right, that's like, I am so naive, I don't talk to this with people, it weirds me out how like common it is now, but I'm like, are people just getting it?
And the league's position is, we don't have a position on the policy. Pass it, don't pass it. But if you do pass it, we've got a list of things you better think about. I mean, that's including tax revenue and that kind of licensing, zoning, that kind of stuff. But our official position is, that's up to the state. If you're gonna do it, here's what cities need to make it successful.
Just like, the Missouri folks are coming over to Kansas to play some sports bet.
Yeah.
I had a business, guy in Westwood wants to start a business to have what do you call it, like beers and bets or something. And he wants to basically, because we are so close to the state line, as one of our border, that he wants to have a place where people can come, have a beer, and they can there's no betting happening in his place, but just get on be with a community of people who want to log on from their phone and place their bet. And I'm like, all right, dude, I'll do like a city thing. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that is what is happening. You've got people who are just figuring out where to get what they want, and it's pretty close.
Interesting. Commerce.
Absolutely.
I think it was the see the Kansas City Commission.
Well, I mean, what about, like, I don't know, I have an issue with it.
So those are the three things. I missed anything? I think those are the three things we just didn't specifically address, but we get the most questions on.
Realtors are pushing a bill that would create maybe $100 million local infrastructure fund to fund improvements needed for new construction.
Yes, they're supposed to get me, it's based off of a bill in
Indiana.
Yeah, in fact, they was gonna send me a copy of the Indiana bill.
Yeah.
We could look at it. I don't think sent me that yet.
So,
But,
and I think there's language in the
yeah, I think we just, it's similar to the housing.
I'm curious, short-term rental, is that an issue anywhere else? Manhattan does not regulate, or
So,
we don't, I think we have a problem with sales tax. Airbnb and the units that hook up with the national do collect our transient guest tax and our sales tax, is what I think. But there are so many that aren't a part of those national taxing systems. Is
So-
that an issue?
so Jay Hall and I got a question about this from legislative research a month ago.
Okay.
Because there's a legislator asking the question, and our response both was, we believe current laws exist to let municipalities deal with the issue. And I said, I guess it depends on your perspective. I said, I'm not sure, what is the legislator asking? Are they asking if cities can deal with it now? Or are they asking because they want to put restrictions or create a statewide system? And he said, well, I'm not exactly sure. I just wanted to know. But both Jay and I responded, and we believe this, you can do what you need to do right now locally. And we have no interest in the state starting to pass a bunch of laws, either restricting what we can do, because I think that's where the question came from. I think what we've got are some upset short-term renters going to their legislators saying, oh man, my city just passed some restrictions and I don't like it. That's free market. Let me do whatever I want. But as city folks, well, that's great, but I don't want 10 cars in filling up a neighborhood, right? I want restrictions on, if it's a 4-bedroom house, how many people can stay there? And you got to get a license. You got to just tell us it's there. And so
We have those basic codes, but what we don't have is a requirement that they have to pay. Transient
we
guest
believe if
tax.
you wanted to pass that locally, you could do it. Now it's
Okay.
complicated and messy and you get upset people.
Because I think our hotels are at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
And
He can report to the Department of Revenue, and they have the ability to go to the Department of Revenue.
But so at this point, if they wanted to do us, we think cities are good, don't mess with it.
Yeah.
That's our hope. And that's what we told legislative research, both Jay and I.
because they're supposed to pay transient guest tax in the city. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Okay.
Our little town, a square mile, which is all residential, around the golf course, is putting that question on the ballot in November, whether the citizens want short-term rentals. Council didn't want to make that decision. So we had heated city discussions. And our attorney said we might be facing some lawsuits. But we're hoping, we are hoping that people don't want to. Because if they do, we're gonna have to.
Good news is you have some cities, you can probably steal those regulations from them. There are some cities who pass some stuff, but at least give you a baseline to set those regulations. So those are the couple issues.
Other items that anybody wants to,
I was gonna cover just a couple quick things. We've already covered a lot of them, but just give you from our, Brad's kind of didn't want to talk about or hasn't thought about it. It does matter that it's an election year. It matters that it's both the House and Senate as an election year. It matters that we just had redistricting and we have some House members now running against Senate members moving so they can make sure they can run in a different House, and current House members considering running for the Senate. And so, I mean, all this does matter because I do think it is going to play into how they're approaching each other and positions they're going to take and how they're going to enter into it. So we obviously are going to have to watch that very carefully. I don't know how much it's going to impact. Senator McGinn has been a great friend to us as the local chair of local government, as the chair of local government. I have no idea how her approach is gonna be now that she has a primary opponent from Representative. I don't know. I mean, she's usually held strong. She's not one to sway too much. But there may be one or two things like vacant property registry that she feels like, I either gotta let this go this year or have it. Because I've suddenly got a tough election. I don't know, but we'll certainly watch that. And if that matters on what issues she's willing to hear or not hear, I have no idea.
So on the flip side, what about Representative Owen?
Yeah, we don't care anything
I know.
that matters to us.
Doesn't mean you don't want to be his friend, just in case.
Well, we'll still be his friend.
Yeah.
I just mean from her perspective of, if there's an issue we thought would get a hearing, there have been times she has absolutely understood with us, talked to us and said, I get you, I hate it too. I'm gonna do everything as chair to make sure it either happens or doesn't happen. And I don't know how that is. So she said, Spencer, I get you, but I gotta let this one go today. I don't know that. And I respect that position she's in and will respect it. So that's what I mean from that. It's how the funnel's gonna look this year with that extra added component in that committee. Because she's gotta do what she's gotta do too, that's kind of how that works. We will still deal this year, as we have the last 2 years, with what I guess I will call the anti-city problem. I mean, there's very much a number of legislators over there who believe we are the root of all evil and we cause most of the problems. And if they could just take control of all our cities, all the problems would be solved. We're going to continue to have that.
This isn't helping.
Right. Well, yeah,
I'll
right.
pass that around.
No, that is not. Yeah, right. That's
It's the Kansas City Star talking about corruption and malfeasance, I guess, in cities.
now that sentiment is much stronger on the Senate side than it is on the House side.
And it's
I mean,
Missouri.
even though Speaker Hawkins will say things like, I don't trust the cities with our LABTR money, he does respect home rule to a much larger degree than Masterson does, and then Karen Tyson does, and some of those components. But it's a real problem.
Yeah.
And so here we are, and we're heading in that this year, trying again, as we do some of the information of what we really give. We are working on ways to remind these folks, we're not perfect, but we're not the enemy.
Perception.
And part of that is we had a meeting last week. Is that last week? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Let's got time with, we are doing our part as a league to build coalitions with other organizations that we've traditionally, I don't want to say are adversaries of, but don't always communicate. And that includes the realtors and the bankers and the hospital association and the Kansas Chamber. And we've reached out to those groups. In fact, all 5 of us got into a room last week and had a meeting about, hey, we're not going to agree on all this stuff. We know that. But before you drop a big bill that's a huge preemption bill, can we have a conversation on some of these issues that we do kind of all agree? Maybe we can work some of these out together before we go and actually show a unified front on a couple issues that matter to all of us. And so I think those conversations have been productive. And we're hoping through having those talks with them, it's not always, it's okay, we're mad at the cities today, but maybe they're not as evil as we said they were a year ago, right? We'll see, time will tell, but I think it's important for all the members to know we are working hard to build those connections with groups that we've had some of those issues with over the last couple of years. There will be a handful again of preemption bills, ranging from the small, if you want to call it, like the plastic bag issue, to my guess is much larger things again this year. I don't know what they all are. We'll have to take them as they come, but we expect those to be at the top. And then we talked about the issues. Obviously, I don't know where the property tax stuff will end up, but I know it's coming. I know where the reason that they're horrible. We are, the devil. And so it's fine. We'll deal with it, but there will be some sort of property tax hammer attempted to be dropped on us, and we'll just have to see what it is. So I think those are kind of things that are way at the top that we're watching, that we know are coming in terms of what I call the big broader issues.
I was going to mention quickly, I had a meeting with the guy who's head of the Associated Landlords of Kansas. Well, meeting, I haven't too far off, but anyway, we had a conversation, and he is not going to oppose the vacant house registers. He's opposed this part. So he said, you guys have your registries, just don't charge us. And so, that's a little bit of a breakneck. Quite honestly, KCK was outrageous.
I was just, some of your members are our problem.
It's like $250 every 6 months. And so anyway, if you eliminate the fees, or you only charge a fee that just covers the administrative costs, the landlords, I think, are gonna say, okay, that's why the bill is made. So,
Yeah, and then it was added.
Well, and it got switched around, and so anyway, the other thing I'll mention quickly, I haven't had a lot of sense with the Ty Masterson's brother is on the Butler County Commission. So I keep trying to make inroads, and I think families are dysfunctional in that sense. It hasn't been real effective, but, you know.
The other items folks might want to bring up for the,
Are there many counties that have adopted the short-term rental? Riley County just adopted a short-term rental registry, I would say.
I've tried to survey to see, but I haven't gotten correspondence.
Just curious if
What's that
that's,
city?
I thought it was a city, but Manhattan, well, our commission makeup is currently really influenced by landlords and realtors. And so it hasn't, we've never done anything except we do have, just they have to follow the. But that's why I was kind of blindsided that Riley County adopted short-term rental. Resolution.
We were asked to, as a league, to oppose or to support the elimination of daylight savings. We decided not to take a position.
Oh, because I would make a motion that we do. As a parent of a toddler, that would be the best.
So what's funny is, the last time the Kansas legislature looked at the issue, they agreed that we should, but they couldn't agree on which one. And so it died. They couldn't agree okay, fine, but do we stay with forward, backward, which one do we accept? And they got so bogged down in that argument that it didn't matter that they all agreed they wanted to stop recognizing it. So, when you wanted to flip a coin, so.
It's amazing. It's the funniest hearing I've ever heard. Just, they all agree that we should do away with it, but half of the room is fighting the other half. It's you're either or you pick it up and start. They can't decide.
I think we're gonna a half hour, let's just do it. Let it go on the half hour, everybody else will catch up.
Very similar to the
Not me.
medical marijuana issue, when they were talking about the armed forces, and they spent, I'm not joking, 45 minutes on whether to include the Space Force or not. Until someone finally said, why don't we just change the language after 45 minutes to all armed forces? Oh, great. So, God bless you. You want to know why medical marijuana?
okay, any other item? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the statement of municipal policies. All right. Did somebody second? Okay, Mike second. Okay, I've got a motion and a second. Questions? Questions, clarity, any additional things? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Okay,
Good news for you is, bad news for us, and if you change your mind, you just show up in October and say.
right.
Heard that big sign.
Does somebody want to talk about advocacy?
Yeah, I got a couple things to make about our policy meetings or.
Yeah.
They'll tell you that in a minute.
Yeah.
Just a couple things I want to remind people. We keep what we call a key contacts list every year. Those are individuals. We try to attach a key contact to every city, to every individual legislator. Just one person who in times of crunch has built some relationship, even if it's, hey, I recognize you and I know who you are, that they can call or email at the last minute. When we have those bills, we say, oh my gosh, please call them or text them right now. If you don't, Wendy and I will be working on where our holes are. So if you don't have somebody, we may give you a call and say, give us somebody, we'll work with them. They don't have to do all the work. We'll help make those relationships to some degree, but those are very important for us. And I already mentioned, so that was the only thing I want to remind about advocacy and relationship building, but we'll be working on that key contact list here before this session. So if we've got somebody, let us know, or if you think you're a key contact, we'll start sending you some reminders here pretty soon.
Under the events page for the league's homepage, historically, you would have seen the legislative either suppers or dinners, depending on the year that you were looking at them. after meeting with people around the state this summer, we're going to be expanding them a little bit. We're currently labeling them as the city forums. It's one of the pieces, and I think it was reflected by the conversation here today, is making sure that we're regularly giving members an opportunity to speak with each other about the issues that you're facing on the local level, particularly within your respective regions. And so we're going to continue to have the meals, both lunches and dinners around the state coming up this fall. But the plan is to break it up into a few different segments for what the day or what the event will be. First portion will be more geographically centered on what you have going on in your respective communities. That will be city officials only and league staff. The next portion will be a brief recap. That will likely be Spencer giving the update on what we have for our statement of municipal policy. Be a chance to kind of see how those points converge. And then as a final point, reaching out to give local legislators an opportunity to join. We'll be facilitating those conversations, giving them a chance to speak, but also saying, here's some of the things that we as membership discussed earlier that are specific to each region and the cities. So a few different points. It'll be more of an opportunity to come and go. Ideally, we would love to have you there for the entire thing, but it'll be a little bit bigger shebang than what you may have seen in the past. But we want to bring some clarity about each segment of the gatherings. So that will look a little bit different this year. So we'd love to have you.
Geographic areas be?
We are hitting all 6 KDOT regions. So similar to how we have our governing body
Okay.
represented.
So they move around every year.
Yeah. I would. Hayes may be your closest one this year. I'd have to take a look up.
There haven't been any close for the last 2 years.
We'll be in, let's see, Scott City, Oberlin, Hayes, Olathe, Hutchinson, and Pittsburgh this year. Next year we'll rotate some.
Just as a segue, that was one of the points that came out in our strategic plan process. We went around the state and got input. So if you guys have got an opportunity to speak into that or go to one of our meetings and things like that, thanks very much for that. We'll be presenting next week when we're McPherson to kind of a draft of our strategic plan to the governing body, and then make a presentation to the full membership when we have our annual conference done in Wichita. So thanks if you got an opportunity to speak into that. It's not done yet, so still have opportunities, but thanks for that. And that was one of the things that we heard as we were going around. So
Absolutely. One
Okay.
other point on advocacy, and I forgive you because I know some of you have heard this multiple times from the previous sessions, but this is still the time of year, really up until Thanksgiving, where it is a great opportunity to meet with your local legislators. I know there is a tendency to want formal programming where it may be the whole council and maybe staff and a big group, but one-on-one conversations between you and your senator, your representative. And I would encourage you to lead with what issues are most important to you. You have a large number of people who have had an interest in politics or policy, depending on what committee they go on or whether or not they have a leadership spot or not. That opportunity to talk about what they want for their community in a sense of shared governance and shared leadership. They don't always have a voice to be able to share that. And so knowing that the cities are vested partners in this is a mindset that is incredibly important to communicate. And those are pretty low pressure opportunities. If you just get together and have a conversation about how fantastic the Chiefs are going to be this year, that's all the better. But you have to start building up those relationships now if there's going to be any relational capital come spring when the big bills are going forward. It can't just come down and hope for an ask at the end and expect there to be much responsiveness because people are getting tugged every which way. So as you have bandwidth or your peers within the city, love you to look for those opportunities if possible.
Okay,
That's it for mine.
I think,
Are there any Manhattan I need to work on?
Maybe.
Any topics?
Manhattan is usually pretty well engaged. We
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
I agree, but I just, there's a topic. that-
well, thank you guys so much for being here. You guys were, a lot of input today, and so that was very, very helpful to us on the process. Again, we'll take this and the governing body will talk about it, next week, when we're in person. And then have the conclusion when we get to the annual conference. So thank you very much for being here. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, and we'll give you back an hour of your time. Thank you, Terry.
Second.
All right, motion by Terry, second by Sarah to adjourn, and I'm gonna assume everybody says yes, so we're adjourned.
Thank you very much.